This is James Arnold Taylor, the voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi. Welcome to a more civilized podcast. This is the podcast you're looking for. You may not go about your business. Stay here, listen, and then move along.
My goodness, we are here. We are ready, I think, right? As ready as we ever are. Welcome, listeners, to yet another episode of a more civilized podcast. Today we're going to talk about the rise and fall of a mighty empire. And Ross is going to take the lead. He's going to teach us all a thing or two. As usual, I'm Kyler.
I'm Chris.
And I'm Ross.
So there we are.
Really, I'm just going to, Shanghai you as I pontificate on games for however long this will take.
I'm so looking forward to
is. So, Ross, you got some news for us, I think.
We do. We have some very interesting news. Very devious and dastardly news. According to a report from The Blast, the set of The Mandalorian was compromised when expensive equipment from the camera department went missing, and Lucasfilm was worried that a missing memory card could lead to some secretive details about the show being released. So, when is the scheduled release for The Mandalorian?
It's fall of next year. Fall
I
of
was going to
2019.
say, it's still pretty vague, but yeah.
It's the rumor is that it's going to help launch Disney's streaming service,
Yeah,
which,
it's
launches,
everyone's assumption,
which launches in the fall of next year.
Right.
So, and the other rumor is that Star Wars Resistance is also going to move off of
there.
Disney Channel onto the streaming service.
I wonder what Lucasfilm's response will be if someone comes forward, because this does happen from time to time, and a lot of times the company will be like, hey, we'll give you a insert large sum of money to not do anything.
I could see it going multiple ways, because I'm like, on the one hand, it's Disney, and Disney is quite litigious.
Yeah, you don't mess with the mouse.
But on the other hand, Marvel is also owned by Disney, and with spoilers for Marvel, Marvel has generally been pretty laid back about it. There's like, they had one of their trailers for, I think it was Age of Ultron was leaked early, and Marvel's response on Twitter was just, damn it, Hydra.
Oh, that's right. I remember that.
It was great. It was a great
that
way to handle it. It was very classy.
See, but
actually,
I'm going, man, that's an awful gamble to take. I could be sued into next century.
Yeah.
Or they might totally forgive me. Who knows?
Yeah.
Well, and it's just...
Well, and I would still wager that if they had found out exactly who did it, I don't know if they did or not, but they might still, even if they handled it quite well on Twitter, that doesn't mean they would have handled it well
behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Well, and this is fairly recent.
Yeah, this just happened
so they may not
within the last week, I think.
Yeah, they don't even know who it is yet.
Yeah.
So,
Well, nothing's been leaked so far, so...
Yeah.
Yeah, I would feel so bad. Like, I don't know how this would happen, but, like, what if, like, it's like you accidentally took the keys or something like what if it was a total accident and you found out, like, you got home and you're like, oh, shoot, I got this. I'll bring it into work on Monday. Yeah. And then Disney's like, where is this? Oh, shoot.
This guy's walking around like Sully and Mike in Monsters, Inc. Like, no, I didn't mean to.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, who knows? So we'll find out, presumably, at some point. But I think it's hilarious that a show about an outlaw has the stuff stolen. I just think that's so poetic. I loved it. Ugh, good times.
Yeah, it'll be fun. So,
oh man,
are we ready?
We're ready. Okay, listeners, you need to just pause the episode, go to your bathroom breaks, make yourself a sandwich.
They probably just took off.
Yeah.
Ross is going to take us on a journey. It's going to be a while.
Let's learn some stuff about LucasArts.
I don't know how long this is going to take. I was very thorough in my research.
Very thorough.
And really what ended up happening is I would find a topic and then think of a question and end up down some rabbit hole of internetdom.
Yeah.
Right? Yep. Of LucasArts internetdom. And I would record it all. So I am currently sitting in front of 10 pages of an outline.
Which is almost 2/3 of what I had for the Rogue One episode.
So, this is just as fair warning. I mean, this might take, 20 minutes as I just read the thing, or it might take forever depending on how deep
Well, Ross,
we get
be
into
careful.
it, so.
Our listeners are not willing to sit through very long episodes.
Yeah. As they download and listen to our two most popular episodes are our two longest episodes.
By a very vast margin.
By doubling the next runner up.
So, hopefully I can provide a good episode for you all.
Oh, I'm so excited.
Yes.
Now, also, LucasArts, I love you so, and it pains me so much as to what happened to you.
Yeah.
LucasArts was founded May 1st of 1982. Closed April 3rd, 2013 at the acquisition of Disney. Well, or roughly after. Shortly after.
Yeah.
136 games.
That is actually like right at the official purchase. They
Yeah.
made the
It was one
handshake
of the
deal
first
in
things they
October.
did, yeah.
Yeah.
So Disney and Lucasfilm make the handshake, or George Lucas makes the handshake deal in October, but all the paperwork and the actual final sale does happen at the very beginning of
Right.
April. So this is...
And that was a busy day for news outlets because most of the articles I found, even just in regards to LucasArts, were always April 3rd, April 3rd, April 3rd. You'd have a dozen different articles all over the place as that was announced, and then they started releasing more details that same day. It was a sad day. But 136 games were released under LucasArts itself, starting in 1982 with a game themed under The Empire Strikes Back, published for the Atari and Intellivision. And it ends with the publishing of the Tiny Death Star for mobile in 2013.
And I believe you can see that Atari Empire Strikes Back in an episode of The Goldbergs.
Oh,
Has
really?
Goldberg playing it. I'm
Oh,
pretty
that's
sure
awesome.
that's what it is. Because it's set in 1980-something.
Right.
So, yeah, I'm
I
pretty
believe
sure
they also
that's-
did a Return of the Jedi a
They
couple
do.
years later. So it could be one of those two.
Oh,
but-
yeah, don't look too close at the timeline. Because the Return of the Jedi episode of Goldbergs is the first season, which is supposed to be then 1983.
Right.
But then they have, like, 2 seasons later, they have, like, him playing the Empire Strikes Back game that just came out. And stuff.
Well,
like, it's...
But yeah, again, it was 1982 when Empire Strikes Back released. So I mean,
Yeah.
they don't like they do now and release with movies or
Yeah.
shortly before. It was when they had it ready.
Yeah.
So
Sorry. I'll
Which
save it for our
is,
Goldberg
in a
episode.
lot of ways,
Yeah.
a really great way to make stuff.
Yeah.
It doesn't fit a great marketing schedule, but it's better for the product, usually.
yeah. 3 more games are attributed to LucasArts in 2014 and 1 to Lucasfilm. So that was after they kind of started switching LucasArts. That's going to get so confusing over this episode.
Yes, for reference, Lucasfilm was George's company that he founded to make Star Wars movies. LucasArts is what eventually became the name of the game-making company.
Yep.
I get those confused all the time.
Stupid Lucas and
I
naming
constantly call Lucasfilm LucasArts.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and Lucas has to name everything after himself, so
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
he's not making it easy for us. After 2013, then LucasArts isn't officially closed, but they just have a staff of less than 10 people currently, and
They're not making games.
right. They are strictly a publisher, or actually, not even a publisher. They're a licensor of Star Wars, or of
So
other
those
Lucas
10 people
properties.
are lawyers who are making sure that the
More or less,
licenses
yeah.
are up to
Yeah.
speed.
Couple
Actually-
lawyers and an accountant.
Yeah. Okay, got it.
and maybe someone else to play the games if they don't want to, sort of thing, to actually review for quality. and
Gotcha.
that sort
Yeah,
of thing.
maybe.
But there's LucasArts is not what it used to be, and it pains me to no
It
end.
is sad.
Because LucasArts, I mean, just as an aside, was a super important studio to me because their games are always amazing.
Yeah.
Right? They are
Well,
what...
just if you just look at the history of video games, LucasArts is a very, very significant
very
figure.
prolific. Yeah, absolutely. And so...
Well,
'cause
not just prolific, but many, many times over their history, ahead of their game. You
Yeah.
know, ahead
They're
of the,
very influential,
ahead of the
very
industry. You know,
groundbreaking.
like they very much like Lucasfilm.
Yeah.
Like they push limits. They make games that are ahead of their time that sort of break new ground for other games to come in and polish up.
That was one of their slogans. I have it written down somewhere, and I
So-
don't remember where it is in my notes, but they wanted to be pushing that envelope.
And
Yep.
they certainly did.
Yep.
Yeah, they did a great job. So there are a handful of games still available on mobile under the Lucasfilm or LucasArts banner.
Yeah.
But again, officially, it's not publishing anything anymore. LucasArts has released a game every year from 1984 to its closure in 2013.
Do the math, people.
29.
Yeah. It's a bunch. LucasArts themselves, after 2004, started
And
focusing more...
that's not counting the years where they released more than one game
Oh, yeah,
a
yeah.
year.
Right.
That's
Easily.
just...
But
but
they
can you
never missed
imagine
a year.
29 years, never missing a year, releasing a game from the same franchise. And all of them are successful. Like...
Well, no,
Well,
that's...
for the most part.
Yeah, but...
LucasArts did everything that Lucas and Spielberg and a bunch of the others were doing. So this isn't all just Star Wars, that
Yeah.
statistic. I actually have another one that's Star Wars specific in just a second.
Okay,
that we'll
sorry.
get to.
Sorry, jump with the gun.
And there were after their closure, there have been 41 additional games licensed under the Star Wars name after the developer's closure.
Yeah.
So that's them sending things out to EA, to various mobile companies, to just whoever they want to have make a game. Let's see. Usually, I think I'm also mixing up my stats. So we just talked about 41 additional games under the Star Wars license after the dev closure. LucasArts released a game every year from 1984 to its closure in 2013. LucasArts themselves, after 2004, started focusing more on licensing and publishing, usually publishing multiple titles a year for various studios. Now, Star Wars exclusive titles released were a total of 186.
Holy crap.
This does include expansions, like the Dark Forces series had an expansion of Mysteries of the Sith. Empire at War had the Forces of Corruption expansion.
Still, what was the number? It was 186 Star Wars games?
Yeah.
Including, these large-scale expansions.
In 30-ish years?
Yeah.
Well over 30 years?
And also...
That's incredible.
There are only a handful of expansions, so most of those are standalone titles of one form or another. They've done a lot for like educational games, especially in the beginning, and lots of different mobile things that are all... they were semi-popular in their release, but then have disappeared from the app stores, that sort of thing. Yeah. So, some of them were good. There were a couple that actually I'm surprised.
A surprising degree of success in that amount, yeah.
And then, let's see. Oh, so it includes expansions, but not DLC packs. So, like in-app purchases, it does not include any of those. Re-releases are counted under the original release, because they have gone back and like remastered a couple older things.
Yeah.
And also, this was counted by hand, so give or take a few, but it's definitely in the 180 range somewhere. There were new titles every year since 91. Also, they've only missed a handful of years. So let's see. Yeah, so 91, there's been a Star Wars title every year, up until which year? And I'm quizzing you guys.
Oh.
Which year have they missed since 1991? There's only one.
I'm going to guess.
Only one.
Only one.
My guess is, but they're counting mobile games.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go with 2011.
Dang it. I was going to say, it's going to be like the later 2000s as far as like getting towards the end of its
It is later
life.
2000s, especially, and that's a good guess because they had a lot of like...
the later aughts.
They had what's the word I'm trying to look for? They've had a lot of like upheaval.
Do I win if I get closer than Chris?
No.
Oh, darn.
Bummer.
I was going to say 2010.
Closest without going over.
You are closer.
Okay, 2009.
It's 8.
2009.
We're like right.
No.
Now we have to guess the month, Chris.
And I can see I may have prompted you
because we missed
I may have prompted you poorly because you say later, not later aughts, it's later 2000s.
Oh, okay, so later teens. Okay.
So this year.
This
there was no Star Wars title released this year.
I was thinking like till 2013 when it died. That's what I was thinking.
Oh,
I thought the limit was 91 to 2013.
I should have been. I should have been more specific.
Dang it, Ross!
Every year since 1991 up until 2018, there's been a new Star Wars game.
Dang.
Now, throughout the history of the studio, they've only missed 4 years: 1986, 1989, 1990, and 2018. Those are the only years that the Star Wars game has not come out since 1982.
Yeah, so, that actually seems high to me.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah, honestly, but I always go back and think about how many of those I missed. You know?
Right?
Because especially in the middle 2000s, middle aughts, how heavy I was into Star Wars games, and to just miss a whole slew of them, made me sad. So to give you a better overview than I can do, I'm just going to take the opening paragraph from Wikipedia. LucasArts Entertainment Company, LLC, is an American video game publisher and licensor. Until 2013, it was also a video game developer. LucasArts is best known for its graphic adventure games, as well as games based on the Star Wars and Indiana Jones franchises. Its headquarters were in San Francisco, California. It was founded in May 1982 by George Lucas as Lucasfilm Games, not LucasArts, the video game development group for his film company. Lucas initially served as the company's chairman. During a 1990 reorganization of LucasArts companies, the Lucasfilm Games division was renamed to LucasArts. LucasArts was acquired by the Walt Disney Company through the acquisition of its parent company, Lucasfilm, in 2012, and on April 3rd, 2013, Disney halted all internal development at LucasArts and laid off most of its staff. However, LucasArts, I know,
it's a bad choice, Disney. I'm just saying it now.
Honestly, and just this overview, there's so much more at the end of the timeline that makes me so angry.
Yeah.
LucasArts remained open so that it could retain its function as a licensor. The development of games based on the Star Wars license will be carried out by Electronic Arts, and that's the part that hurts me the most.
Yeah, that's the most painful.
Through an exclusive license for the core gaming market, and that's meaning consoles, PC. When you think gamer, EA is the one that's overseeing the games, feeding to those people. And then Disney Interactive Studios retain the ability to develop for LucasArts on mobile. Interesting note, though, is that Disney Interactive also closed down in 2016, and so the license for Star Wars mobile games, it's kind of ambiguous. I think it's just kind of defaulted back to LucasArts itself. I couldn't really find any
That would
information.
make sense.
Yeah. But it is kind of up in the air as to who is working on those for now. Which is probably part of the reason why a lot of those games have disappeared, now that I think about it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But anyway. Oh, that's right. And the last of it was just that it's either Disney Interactive or other third parties, depending on who the remaining people at LucasArts deem fit. So, 1979, George Lucas wanted to branch out into other areas of entertainment business as opposed to just movies.
That's crazy. 1979, he's got the idea for
That's
this.
when he starts thinking about
That's
it, yeah.
crazy.
He initially started with what was called the Lucasfilm Computer Division, which was split into a few departments. One of which was the Games Group, that was their own little title, and the other was a graphics department, which is what eventually became Pixar.
Yep.
Yeah. Because Steve Jobs wanted to buy it, thought they were doing great stuff, and Pixar was, well, I think they had kind of branched off on their own, because I know that they had their own name at that point, but they were not doing very well, and so Steve Jobs was the one who kind of resurrected them.
Yep.
But the early charter for Lucasfilm Games was to make experimental, innovative, and technologically advanced video games, which, like we were talking about before, they very much did. The Games Group initially was partnered with Atari to produce video games. Atari was providing funding, but held exclusive rights to Star Wars video games, meaning that the early Games Group had to branch out into other ideas. Ron Gilbert, who was an early designer for the Games Group, mused that if the Game Group had held the rights to Star Wars games, they probably wouldn't have done anything else.
So glad it worked out that way.
Yeah.
Because as much as I love a lot of their Star Wars games, so much of what they did that wasn't Star Wars was so worthwhile. Mm-hmm. And when they later kind of shifted back to, we're basically going to focus on Star Wars exclusively again, there was still some fun stuff that came out, but it was a definite loss to the games industry.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, and it's awesome that they made that decision. I mean, it's the greatest happy accident probably in the universe. So.
Well.
So, in 1984...
What about your birth? Oh! Sorry.
We'll just leave that one where it is. In March of 1984, the Games Group first game was released, Ball Blazer, and Rescue on Fractalus, I think is how you would say it. Fractalus? I don't know.
Idea.
And they were released on the Atari 5200. Betas of both games were leaked 1 week after Atari received copies of the games for review. The games were unprotected and had been posted on an early internet message board. And so they also, one article I was reading talked about how this is probably what helped them get a little bit more popular, because that's where a lot of these games were, that was kind of their target audience, were those that are visiting message type boards. Yeah. And so they probably wouldn't have done as well had that not happened. Today, lots of people would have lost their jobs had that happened. So, in 1985, the game Habitat was the first attempt to implement graphical front end to an MMORPG genre.
Okay. Now, I know what those terms mean.
Oh, right.
But for the audience who doesn't.
Yes, I asked these guys to kind of stop and help me translate game jargon into regular people speak. So, an MMORPG is a massive multiplayer online role-playing game.
Yeah, World of Warcraft.
World of Warcraft is the one you're probably familiar with.
Most well-known,
yeah. In talking about a graphical front end...
Yeah, that. I know, but, you know...
Do you? Hey, most of the time...
Don't protest too much.
I know. RPGs were normally done as a text base or a... they would kind of draw, like, stick people...
Yeah, you'd have like the early Wizardry games and Ultima games. Like Ultima was also one of the early ones to push for graphical presentation of what was happening. But generally, you'd just you'd have Zorg with its text-based interface and everything, and maybe like with Wizardry, you'd have like a couple lines to signify like, oh, you're in a tunnel and here's a stick figure of whatever you're fighting. But it was very light on. There wasn't a lot of visual
There's
representation.
also an episode of this on Goldberg's.
Oh, was it?
The old text-based adventure games.
So, this game Habitat was the first time they tried to actually put pretty pictures with the back-end programming. It only released as a beta on the service called Quantum Link, which was an early version of just an internet network. That later became America Online, more commonly known as AOL. Yeah.
Okay.
I know. And this is also specific
so you're saying that we can thank George Lucas for email?
No.
No. It was released on.
Okay.
But
Email. The internet was already starting, and had already been starting, kind of in the late 70s.
Gotcha.
Of course, it didn't actually take off until much later. But this was also specific for the Commodore 64, so it was very very specific. And also, it turned out that the game was too hard for the network to support it. There was too much information needed to be passed forth that it just couldn't do it. So it was only ever a beta and never actually got full release. The game was also a large-scale community in the vein of Second Life, but looked like Maniac Mansion. So Second Life is, it's an MMORPG, but it's
if
it's
you've
supposed
seen
to be...
The Office,
yes, Dwight has a second life in.
Yeah, Dwight plays it, and the graphics are bad.
Well, and the game is based around you have a person, and that person has a life. You have to go to work as this person. You form relationships. There was a lot of drama when at its height of people getting married in Second Life to other real people, but obviously not their own spouse. And does that constitute cheating on your spouse? There were just a lot of moral questions around this game. And Maniac Mansion. So this era of games were very. It's hard to even describe unless you've seen it. The computers at the time could only display either, I think it was 4 was the smaller end, it was either 4 or 8. And the higher end computers could display 16 colors. That's it. Yeah. So, you had to make an entire scene of nothing but these 4 colors. You've probably all seen the Pitfall, the old Atari game that was super popular. Yeah. That's what we were dealing with. You only had a handful of colors to work with.
Yeah. Often in games like this, so you'd have a black background with white lining and everything, and then you just have an occasional color pieces here and there, and it would be heavily some major greens and blues and accents with a couple others. But
the one of the article, well, actually, it was a video that I was watching for a game I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. Described it as it was like what would happen if a clown barfed up slushy or something like that. I don't remember what his analogy was, but it's bright colors and just ghastly in combination. Yeah. So that's the best way to put it. So from there in 1986, first LucasArts point-and-click adventure game Labyrinth was published. Yes, that Labyrinth.
Yes.
From the movie.
Wow.
Players were able to customize their characters by declaring their gender and shirt color when they were asked by the game in the beginning. Games used characters from the movie, but was its own plot. This was also I found super interesting. The player had 13 real-time hours to finish the game, or the player would be locked in the game universe's maze forever. So not like game time, it was actual,
real time. If you stopped playing, it was still tracking.
Right. And so you had to finish.
So you better make all your you better make sure all your chores are done.
Yeah,
and that you have permission from your mom to spend all day Saturday playing this game. Because if you don't, that's it.
Yep, you got to start over again the next time you can.
Wow, that's hardcore.
In 1987, Maniac Mansion was released. This is kind of the first real big blockbuster point and click that LucasArts did. I think it really is what gave them the name. There were other point-and-click adventures around, but this is the one that kind of stuck out to everyone at the time. Now we jump to 1990. The game group worked out of Skywalker Ranch. There was a reorganization of Lucas's own companies, and the game group was consolidated with ILM and Skywalker Sound to become the LucasArts Entertainment Company. So ILM, Skywalker Sound, and the game group were all
ILM being Industrial Light and Magic.
Right. Big visual effects company now.
The big.
Yeah.
Well, you got some more now at this point, but for a while there, they were the big player in that.
Yeah, basically. So ILM, Skywalker Sound were all eventually under one roof at the Skywalker Ranch. But eventually, ILM and Skywalker Sound broke off to be their own companies like they are now. And LucasArts, well, the game group retained the LucasArts title and moved from the ranch to San Rafael, California. In May of that year, Loom is released. We'll talk about that more in just a minute under the notable achievements because they did a lot with that particular game. Point-and-click adventure, yeah, we'll talk about it more in a minute. In October, The Secret of Monkey Island is released. Also a super blockbuster hit under the point-and-click adventure.
Spawned many
sequels
that were all very successful.
They remastered it a couple of times in recent years.
Yep.
This is what Tim Schafer of Double Fine Adventures, was his start.
Yeah. Tim Schafer was most well known for point-and-click adventure games at LucasArts.
Yeah. Well, and now has spawned off his own company doing... Well, I don't actually... Are they still doing nothing but point-and-clicks? That was their first game. Yeah.
No, they've done a lot of... Like, Psychonauts.
Oh, that's right. Because I'm thinking of my first real experience with Tim was that Kickstarter they did to do... what was the name of it?
Double Fine.
No, they already had the studio, but they were working on a new point-and-click called Broken Age.
Oh, yeah.
Broken Age. And they did this whole Kickstarter and then this whole, they wanted to do a whole behind-the-scenes with it. It released to kind of reviews. It was okay. I didn't finish it.
I haven't played it at all.
Yeah.
But I adore Psychonauts.
Yeah.
And many of his other games, so.
One interesting also anecdote with this. Back in the day, at least with LucasArts, with this particular game, they couldn't keep up with the demand for the release of the game. Now, back in these days...
It's a good problem to have, though, in some ways. I mean, if your game is that good.
Games were loaded on floppy disks at this time. For those of you younger viewers, that is what you will know as the save button.
Yeah.
That was an actual physical disc, right? And they had
I remember saving, school papers on floppy disks.
Yeah.
For, English
a
class
plastic cartridge which held a floppy circular disc inside for protection because that wouldn't survive on its own.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And that was itself. There were various types of floppy disks. Some were more floppy than others.
Well,
that save disc one was actually more firm.
The Gen 1 floppy disk was the big black squares that were
big,
super flexible.
Like 8-inch, 5-inch,
something like that.
They
were massive.
Yeah, they were big.
Yeah. And these floppy disks were 3.5 inch
3.5
square.
inch.
So
I want to say 5.
No, 3.5 was
No, 3.5.
Oh, 5 for the early ones. Yeah, I know there were 5-inch
Yeah.
ones, but I don't know if the earliest ones were. I think they were like 8-inch or something.
They were huge.
Enormous.
Anyway,
and they could hold a whopping, 64 KB.
I don't even think
terrible.
it was that much. I think the smaller ones got up to that much, but the bigger ones were.
I remember the ones that I saved school projects on were 128 KB, and those were paid a lot of money for those because those were the big ones.
Yeah, the big ones.
Those could hold a lot. I wouldn't even hold a crappy picture on my phone now.
LucasArts was also small enough at the time that because they couldn't keep up with demand, so they had outsourced the actual loading of the game onto the floppy disks to a different kind of
they had to
manufacturing
load
company.
these by hand.
Yeah, and so that was a person sitting at a computer, putting the disc in, moving the files over, popping the disc out.
Oh my gosh!
Putting the sticker
for your
on
8 hours a day, every day. Oh my gosh!
Dream job right there.
But again, the place that they were outsourcing to couldn't keep up, so the developers actually got permission to go over and run that facility to try and meet demand at the time.
Wow.
So a lot of those,
right? It was
a lot of those developers they took that whole night to try and get it on the truck in the morning, where they were wrapping packages, they were saving files. It was apparently a nightmare.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Also in this year...
And you think it's a lot of trouble to go to Pirate Bay, you young whippersnappers.
No, Kyler, the young whippersnappers don't even know what Pirate Bay is.
Oh, shoot.
Yeah, poor Pirate Bay.
Get off my lawn.
At the end of that same year, LucasArts also begins publishing a game magazine called The Adventure, which we'll talk more about in a minute. 1991, the Gold Guy logo makes its first appearance on Monkey Island 2. Yeah, before that time it was...
Yeah, so any of you that are familiar with LucasArts, you'll recognize instantly who Gold Guy is. He's the guy in the corner of your box when you buy your games. Or
and then their opening splash screen.
Your opening splash, yeah.
Would usually have him doing something that was vaguely themed to the game. It was a...
oh my gosh.
There was a purple L that he would stand on that had Lucas and Arts on it. So.
Oh, and what year was that again?
1991.
Dang.
Yeah.
So that was not long after they got rolling.
That was
Well,
79,
that's-
so that was 12 years after this group was formed.
Well, and it was 82 when they actually started developing. So
Yeah.
it was almost
Okay.
10 years
Okay.
of development before
But
that
still,
came
I mean, he's been around for 30 years, or no, 91, 20, 25-ish.
27.
Yeah, 27-ish years.
Math is
I
hard.
can do that one
Yeah.
easy.
And it was always that same logo. They did kind of revamp it a couple years before the end, where they removed the purple L. They kind of made him a little squatter and a little fatter, but it was still a gold person kind of holding a sun
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
thing on it. Monkey Island 2. Was Monkey Island 1? I don't remember. Was it that popular? Now that I
Yes.
think about it.
Yes, it was.
Because I was never a big point-and-click adventure fan.
Yeah,
with one exception.
Monkey Island was a big deal. It still is for a
Yeah.
lot of people. Like, it's a solid game.
Yeah.
I wanted to say it's also had a couple remasters on the list that I was looking
It
at.
has, yeah. We've got you can find that still remastered versions on Steam and on
Right.
GOG.
Well, and I thought your wife, Chris, talked about like Monkey Island and loving it. Like that was my
yeah.
So it's around.
I actually really like what they did with the remaster that you can get on. I think it's the same on GOG, but I know on Steam. I don't see why it wouldn't be the same on Good Old Games. But they have a button that you can click to revert to the old graphics.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so you
Cool.
can switch back and forth between the old graphics and the new ones to see what they've done, and I love it. Like,
That's
it is
awesome.
It is so awesome.
Man, see, I have a love-hate relationship with those buttons because they're starting to pop up in remasters on games now. Like Halo was a big one that did it. So when you're playing a game for the first time, you have a little bit of filling in to do. Your brain does a little bit of filling in for the graphics, and so then when you see something get done again, you look at it and you go like, well, what are we talking about? What did they change?
Yeah.
And then you have that button and you see the way it actually was, and you're just like, oh, that's right. How did we ever think this was good? Shadow of the Colossus was that way for me.
Really?
Because they remastered.
See, I still only have the PS2 version. I have never played any of the remasters.
Because they remastered it again on PS3. But then when you actually... Because that was the one that did it to me. That made me realize this phenomenon. Yeah. I got looking at the PS3 version and was like, well, that's exactly what I remember. What did they do? I mean, and then you go back and you see a side-by-side and you're just, that's terrible.
Well, and it is funny with some games because it's like, that's one thing I like about remastering these old LucasArts games is it's just like, you look at the new Monkey Island and there's no question. Like, the old one was very pixely, very, it's notably dated. Mm-hmm. And it's like looking at the original Ocean's 11 next to the new Ocean's 11. It's like, you can see that these are from massively different eras.
Yeah.
And
good reference.
Thank you. And whereas with a lot of these newer games, it's just, I'm just kind of like, why? Like, really? They remastered Journey for the PS4? Like, it's already gorgeous on the PS3. Like, who cares?
Yeah.
And, I don't think that was so much a remaster, though.
It was just texture upgrades, basically.
Yeah,
it wasn't a
basically,
remaster. It was just
that's fair.
an
Okay,
overhaul.
but even then, I'm always just kind of like, I like preserve. That's why I like those buttons, because I like being able to show, like, this is where we started. Like, this is preserve the history.
Mm-hmm.
Don't just make a new version of it and pretend the other one never existed
Right.
or whatever. Like, I'm all for updating it to make it more accessible for people, because especially for a lot of younger kids these days, the original Monkey Island would be inaccessible. Like,
Yeah.
it would just be something that they're just like, what is this even supposed to be?
Even a lot of their re-releases of older games are even hard. You have a
Yeah,
hard
they're
time
still
running.
tricky. Yeah.
For just in doing my quote-unquote research for this episode, I was playing a lot of the old Dark Forces games, which were still coming up in our timeline. Actually, they're been about 95-ish is where they started. My Windows 10 computer is too new to run the releases on Steam, and so I had to kind of go in Jimmy Rig and like run it in a compatible mode and just all sorts of different stuff to get it up and running. And even then, I can't get the right resolution, so everyone's all fat.
Yeah.
To stretch the screen. Anyway,
yeah. This is by the way, if you're interested, this is a classic problem of preserving video game history. Is that where it's like, Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, and there will never be a situation in which we do not have the capacity to re-enjoy those.
right.
Whereas video games, the very medium on which they are played vanishes, and unless someone goes through it,
And vanishes quickly.
vanishes quickly. Like, video games in general
Yeah.
are young. Like, they
It's
have
like,
not been around long.
You think about Halo as a great example. Like, it came out in, 2002 or something like that. I mean, early 2000s.
Yeah.
I think it was.
So it's not
2000.
that old, right?
Yeah.
Less than a generation.
Yeah.
Right, a generation from a historian's point of view.
It can officially
years.
drink alcohol now.
Yeah, but it's like
if it was 2000.
From a historian's point of view, a generation is about 25 years, is what we say. So it's less than a generation old, but it's already, like, the original looks so outdated, especially compared to that remastered or some of the newer Halos. It's just they go by so fast.
Yeah.
Well, this is my family does not throw things away. We save everything. My grandmother's a hoarder, and so we've all got that gene that we hold on to stuff. And so I've got a ton of old games that I just can't play anymore. Like, in some cases, my computer just does not have a 3.5 inch floppy disk port. But at the same time, it's even the ones that my computer can still read. They just can't do anything with them. Like, it's so outdated, the programming's so old.
Yeah, and then
it's not compatible.
For those that aren't as into the gaming sphere and don't know as much about why, games and things that are programmed, like that you have to have a programmer write.
Yeah.
Part of their education is to how to get the hardware to run in a certain way to make these things work.
Yeah.
So on these original games, these old games, you might have the program that's built to run on a certain speed processor. But with the newer processors, they just don't support that older speed, and so then the game just won't even load. It won't boot up. You can't do anything.
Or if it's something that you can get to work, it'll be like you said with Dark Forces, it'll be the ratios are off. Or I ended up installing I don't remember what I did in order to get the Neverhood to play on my Windows 8 machine a couple years back. But I had to go through this ridiculous process to get my original disc to run at all, and even then the colors were all wonky and everything.
Oh, really?
Was, and it would constantly stutter and have trouble.
I just had a problem with that, trying to get Red Alert 2, Command & Conquer, Red Alert 2 to play.
Yeah.
It was...
Yeah, and so this is one of the tragedies of video game preservation is that they don't preserve well, and in order to preserve them, someone has to go through and write new programming in order to make this old programming compatible with what's new.
Which is why I love Steam so much.
And good old games.
Well,
and good old games.
But even then,
it's only going so far, like the trouble I had on Steam.
Yes, and it's not perfect, but it's certainly better. There's a really fun space game from when Ross and I were younger called Tachyon the Fringe.
Yeah.
Great fun game. Super fun. Try to play it with the actual CD. Your computer's going to just be like, get out. No, But fortunately, somebody loved the game enough. They made it work on Steam, and now you can download it on Steam and play the game fine on your modern computer because somebody's taken that time to sort of write that transition code from old game to new computer.
Yeah. Which will itself be defunct in a couple of years, quite possibly. So.
But that's why I like having it on Steam, where there's that community that cares about the game,
Potentially,
where you have people that are willing to keep updating it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So, as all that aside, I hope all of you were gamers, because we might get deep. I just also wanted to note with Monkey Island 2, going back to our notes, a notable achievement for this particular game was the introduction of something called iMuse. And this was something that I believe LucasArts wrote it. Now, I don't remember actually if they were the authors of this little package or not. But what it was the first time that things like music could be synchronized to actions in the game. Mm-hmm. Normally, it would just be the level would load. One of the things on the loading of the level would be start playing this such and such music, and then it would just go until you were done with the level. This time, with the iMuse, they can actually go in and you hit a certain box on the ground. You now all of a sudden the music changes to something darker to change the mood. Right?
Yeah, so. That was developed at LucasArts.
Okay, by
Michael Land and Peter McConnell, composers. Interesting.
No, makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense.
Composer programmers.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. In November, also of 1991, the first Star Wars game was released by LucasArts itself. All previous Star Wars titles were released under Atari, or by other toy companies such as Parker Brothers and Namco.
Right.
I couldn't find the details of the Atari deal, and I think my note is unfinished as to why I was going that route. Or I couldn't find the Atari the information as to why they got the rights back from Atari, because I believe Atari was still licensing things at this point. I was going to look into that, and I forgot to finish. Just so you guys know, like, I have just this whole wall of text. I'm even having a hard time keeping my own place in my own notes.
That's fair.
So,
Well, but I mean, if that was the mid-90s,
bear
that
with
would
me.
be when Atari really started to
Well,
struggle.
no, early 90s.
Yeah.
This is 91
91.
is when this is
Okay.
happening.
so they
Even
wouldn't
so,
have been...
But it's
That's a rough
yeah,
time for
Atari
Atari.
is dying at this point.
Yeah, they weren't doing their own hardware anymore. I think they were going the route of what Sega did later.
Yeah.
So instead of publishing, developing, they just licensed and then eventually faded into
I'm
nothingness.
so excited for this next one. You're
Oh, yeah.
Point.
Yeah, this is just a personal note for me because I played the crap out of this game. In November of 1992, the Super Star Wars, the SNES 2D platformer was released. So much of this game.
So this, if you'll, listener, go back to our very first episode, you'll remember me talking to you guys about going over to Ross's house to play as a kid, like in middle school, you know, so I'm like 10, 11, 12, like that age range, playing some Star Wars game that I couldn't remember the name of because I didn't ever know the name. It was just the Star Wars game that Ross had. And this is that game, Super Star Wars. It was the plot, quote unquote, of A New Hope.
Very loose.
Very loose
Very
plot,
loose.
yeah. And it was awesome, and I remember, like, I had so many flashbacks today reading through or looking at Ross's notes and seeing this game and stuff. But I would call Ross up and be like, hey, man, you know, can I come play, you know, at your house on Saturday or whatever? Yeah, that's fine. I'm like, okay, you know, I'll be there at like 11. I want to play that Star Wars game, but I only want to play, like, the Sandcrawler mission. So Ross would get on early before I got over there, play through the game up to that point, and then pause it and wait for me to get over, and then we'd go over, and then, you know.
What a friend.
I know, right? Yeah.
To be honest, I don't remember doing that.
Yeah. I'd call, you'd be like, hey, what time you coming over? Yeah, okay, because the first couple times I was polite and do that, but then I was like, we're friends enough. I think I could probably ask him to fast forward to the part that I want to play.
Yeah.
And so many Saturdays over at your house playing this game for hours.
You are
and
a gentleman
hours
in the
and
sky.
hours.
I sure am, man.
It was awesome though, and I loved it because my parents didn't believe in having computer games.
Yeah.
They didn't want us to have consoles because they didn't want us to waste our lives away and you're going to melt your brain and whatever.
That's the same things everyone says anytime some new form of media comes out. But.
And so I loved going over to Ross's house because he had something that I never had and never would be allowed to have, which was a console to go play Star Wars games on. And so that was awesome. And then my parents made the mistake in 95 of, for my birthday, getting me, well, this is a historical game, so you can probably learn something. They got me Age of Empires.
Yeah.
And that was
Your world was
my
changed.
gateway drug to computer games, and I have never come out since.
and honestly, I think that was your love for Age of Empires was
a bonding point for us. I
never played
introduced
it.
you to it,
That's
and
right.
then
I was going to say that was for all of us because my family
Yeah.
got a new gateway computer in like 98 and it
Yep.
came with a bunch
Oh,
of games prepackaged with it, and Age of Empires was one of those.
Oh, you lucky
and I
duck.
remember when we met, it was like, oh yeah, Age of Empires, and one of us, I don't remember who brought it up first, but the other one was like, you know what that is? Yes! It's so cool, isn't it? Number 2 is coming out, man!
Yeah. Yep. And see, and that was one of my jumping off points into my life of games, game devotion, and that sort of thing. Age of Empires, basically anything I played from LucasArts, I mean, that was what made me in my future.
Yep, and then we all got, I'm sure we'll talk about this in a little bit, but I'm going to jump the gun anyway. But then we got so excited when they were coming out with this Star Wars game that's going to be like Age of Empires, but Star Wars, and we were so stoked, and then very disappointed.
Yeah. Wait, are you talking Force Commander on that one?
No, Force Commander was awesome, but no, the Galactic Battlegrounds.
Oh yeah.
That was terrible.
Yeah.
Just terrible.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Don't
do talk
confuse
about that,
Battlegrounds
actually.
with Battlefront.
Oh my
Which
God.
is-
Don't confuse Battlefront with EA's Battlefront.
Which is terrible, but for different reasons.
Yes.
Yeah. Again, all of that we will talk about, actually.
And we will confuse.
Yeah, for
Someone
real.
will confuse, but
I did also want to talk about, and at least for, this was my first real hardcore experience with a LucasArts game. Actually,
Hold on.
that's a lie.
Whenever we talk about Battlefront, and people always be like, which one? And I always say, the good one. And they're like, oh yeah, okay. Yeah. And they know that I'm not talking about EA's Battlefront.
Damn. Yeah, we'll talk about that in a minute.
Oh, shoot. EA. Ugh.
I don't remember what came first. The only point-and-click adventure I ever really did was the Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis game. Again, also by LucasArts.
yeah, and LucasArts did several Indiana
I did
Jones
not
games.
know that LucasArts did anything besides Star Wars
Yeah, they
stuff,
did all
like
sorts of
until
things.
your notes for this episode that I saw.
Oh,
I thought
really?
they were.
Wow.
I thought they were just a Star Wars thing.
Yeah, no,
I had no
that's
idea
fair.
that they did Indiana Jones. I learned just now today during this recording that Indiana Jones had computer games.
They've had a bunch, actually.
Yeah.
Did not know.
Part of the problem, though, is that they haven't had any recently because Tomb Raider and Uncharted took over.
Well, that's the thing is I'm going, why would you play an Indiana Jones game when there's Tomb Raider?
Yeah.
Actually,
So-
that's actually funny because it wasn't Fate of Atlantis. There was another Indiana Jones game with similar mechanics. It was clearly based off of Tomb Raider's mechanics. I can't remember what it was called now, but I wanted to play that so much because as an 11 or 12-year-old boy, my first time playing Tomb Raider, and I was showing this to my friend, and we were sitting there just like, oh, this game is so cool. It's just too bad you have to play as a girl. Like, why can't you play as a guy? It's really what we were going for was immersion. Like, I want to be able to pretend this is me, and that is not what I look like from the back at all. And I do not anticipate a period where I will ever look like that.
I mean, Chris
from
is
the
a
back.
handsome guy from behind, but
Sure. And, my hair has gotten pretty dang long, but I was never quite as shapely as Lara.
Yeah.
Not even close. Even blocky Laura. But yeah, so it's funny because that was my very first reaction when I saw that Indiana Jones game was, yes! It's like Tomb Raider, but I can play as a guy. And not just any guy. I can play as Indiana Jones. That's freaking awesome.
Yeah.
Harrison freaking
Wow.
Ford. With the one we always want to be
right.
like. So I don't remember if it was Indiana Jones first or the Super Star Wars first. But that was where I really started to notice level design and how much work they put into LucasArts, for me anyway, always had an incredible use of its own space.
Yeah.
You always not retraversing areas, but you will start a level somewhere, you will be playing a level for a little while, and then you will walk across a bridge or something somewhere and look down and be like, oh, wait a minute, I started over there. That isn't just a set, painting that they have added in somewhere. I was physically down in that spot. And it was, forever ago, and just the kind of journey you had gone on in the level was always very interesting. Their use of secrets. They love putting little secret areas in their levels. Caleb, our friend Caleb and I, because we were playing the Super Star Wars really heavily back in the day, and we're having a super hard time with a particular jump you had to make in a certain level. And one time, one of us got scared halfway through the jump and tried to make it back onto the platform we were jumping from, but didn't quite make it and fell down. And turns out there was another little hidden ledge underneath that ledge we were jumping from that had a big secret room that had a bunch of power-ups and extra lives. And so we'd end up just farming that room because then you could jump off the edge and die and just sacrifice one life, but then get 4 more back the next go around. And so we used that, and that was the way we beat the game the first time.
Farming lives. That's
We
awesome.
had so many lives that it didn't matter how many times we died, we were still able to make it through to the end.
That's great.
And LucasArts is always will put little secrets like that in and out
That's
everywhere.
great.
Yeah.
So
My personal favorite, I'm going to just jump in here real quick.
Yeah.
So you had Indiana Jones and his Desktop Adventures. You
Oh,
ever see
boy.
that game?
Oh no, this sounds delightful.
Oh, it was. It was this little. It wasn't quite a point-and-click adventure game. It was more of a kind of arcade style, but it was. You just click on a square and they walk over to it.
rail shooter.
Kind of. No, not a rail shooter,
Okay.
really. It was you had. I'm blanking on how quite to classify it, but yeah, you just had a little game map and you could explore the map. And it was top-down, isometric. Not isometrics. It was straight top-down. Yoda Stories was another one that was done in the exact same engine format programming. It was the Star Wars sequel, version of Indiana Jones and his Desktop Adventures. Anyway, very simple little game that could run on your desktop in its own window very simply. It was a lot of fun. I loved both of those. And but yeah, there was a level in Indiana Jones which I've always joked was the inspiration for Crystal Skull. Don't hold it against it, but because there was one of the little adventures you would go on where at the end, if you instead of completing the mission that you were assigned, if you went out of this temple off to the side, you would end up getting abducted by aliens. There would be this saucer out there, and they'd reference how they were the ones that built the temple or something, and they would abduct Indiana Jones, and that would be the end of the level, just as a joke.
Yeah.
But then Yoda Stories came out, and there was another level where if you snuck off to the side at the end, instead of doing that, you, as Luke Skywalker, you would meet Indiana Jones, who had where these aliens would be sitting out there with their saucer grounded, and you'd talk to them, and then they'd have Indiana Jones sitting there just is there any way I can get home? And Luke would just be like, you look exactly like my friend Han. And it was hilarious. It was delightful.
Nice.
And as we know, saucer aliens in Star Wars are part of Hondo's pirate gang. So Hondo Onaka kidnaps Harrison Ford.
Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
And actually, you bring up another point that I hadn't thought about to even talk about is their use of Easter eggs.
Oh, Easter eggs from between games. Yeah,
they love mixing and matching their own stuff. You remember Sam and Max?
Oh yeah.
I guess originally it was a comic book, but then there was a TV show when I was a kid.
Really?
Yeah. And there was this random.
Know the game.
Oh, I think they did games later too.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah. But they had this random Sam and Max cameo in Dark Forces 2, where you're in this little like city, and you walk in, and you have to get a certain non-player character NPC to run, because when they open this door that you can't open normally.
I remember that.
And if you follow them in, you have Max the bunny standing behind like a bar.
Yeah.
Max Sam might have been there as well, but just this random little Sam and Max cameo that you could never get to unless you randomly followed this one person into this door. Anyway, LucasArts is always great.
Yeah.
1993, to help complete our timeline, Star Wars Rebel Assault is released, which was a rail shooter. And for those uninitiated, what that is you don't control the movement of your character. You're just fed scenes in one form or another. Sometimes it's just 2D images. Sometimes you actually are.
If you've gone to an arcade in recent years, there's a lot of rail shooters in arcade where it's like shoot the guys on the screen and then it'll turn the screen and move you over here and then you'll shoot these guys.
Right.
That's a rail shooter.
They tried to do a lot of story with this one, and they also would have random flight segments in it. Yeah. It was super weird. I
remember seeing that. I never played it. But.
Yeah. But it was a good attempt. 1995, February, Star Wars Dark Forces releases.
Kyle Katarn.
It was like the original Doom, created on what they called the Jedi game engine, which they made for this game specifically. And it made several additions to Doom, or it made several improvements to what Doom didn't do. You could look up and down, which you couldn't in Doom.
Is so funny to say now, as like, ooh, they made this improvement. You can look up and down. Yeah. But you go back in game history though, and that kind of stuff really is totally revolutionary. It's way cool.
At the time, that was like, a lot of young kids still won't get this, but like when it's like, you can send little text messages on your phone instead of having to call people.
Well, and this is 1995. I remember that year.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Gaming has come a long way in not very many years.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Other additions is you could now duck.
Jeez, think about this,
jump.
Kate. Yep. From the time of this recording, 1995 is only 23 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So you think 23 years ago, we have a game introducing for the first time the ability to look up and down.
Yeah.
And now, games in 2018 are in virtual reality.
Mm-hmm.
Like, in 23 years, we go from, you can look up and down, isn't this cool and revolutionary, to put this on your head, and now it's in a 3D
and VR has been around for a while, and it comes and goes. But
even not where it's at now.
It improves every iteration.
It's so crazy with what we can do now.
It's a similar sort of progression as Flight. You had the Wright brothers at Kitty Hawk, and then it was something like 50 or 60 some odd years later. No, it had to have been more than that.
Less than that. No.
A long time.
Kitty Hawk is in the early 1900s, like 1903 or 1908, something like that. By World War I, you have, in 1914, actually I think it was the second year of the war that planes were introduced, 1915 or so. Mm-hmm. But anyway, by 1920, you have very maneuverable aircraft.
Yeah.
That go essentially from a self-propelled glider to we can drop bombs, we are dogfighting, we have machine guns on planes.
Well, and
then from 1918 to 1960s, we're now traveling in space.
Into the moon.
Yeah.
So in 60 years, we went from not even knowing it was possible to get off the ground
to leaving this planet.
Outer space.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Crazy.
Technology
is awesome. Yeah, it really is.
Let's see what else. Oh, another notable difference between Doom and the original Dark Forces was that now levels could have multiple. I'm sorry, game levels could have multiple elevation levels.
Yes,
so in
you
other
could
words,
go up a ramp onto a higher platform.
And again, it just led to LucasArts
In a 3D environment.
right.
Yeah.
It shows LucasArts' commitment to interesting level design.
Yeah.
The fact that you could just now do that.
And again,
Although,
pushes...
I know you could do that in Ultima Underworld. What was Ultima Underworld?
But what's interesting, though, is, again, it's this continual pattern of Lucasfilm of pushing the boundaries of what is possible for...
Yep.
Not Lucasfilm. LucasArts.
See? You're doing that.
There we go. Pushing the boundaries of game design, which is awesome. And makes their death even more
sad.
tragic.
Yeah, Ultima Underworld in '92, they had multiple levels and everything.
they?
It was very innovative for the time, but it wasn't in a Doom style. Like, it wasn't quite Doom style. It was its own. But yeah, it was. Anyway, these are very big things for geeks like us.
And it should also be noted, when Dark Forces was released, people started having the complaint that it was a Doom clone. That is not true, because production started on Dark Forces before Doom was announced.
Yeah, I remember.
And it was when Doom did release first, or maybe it was announced first, that's right. They pushed the release date of Dark Forces back so that they could better polish it up and so that they weren't competing with Doom.
Yeah.
So, also you had several bits of very important canon. At least I consider them very important bits of canon.
But they're not canon anymore. Go ahead.
Kyle Katarn, I know. Kyle Katarn was introduced.
We love Kyle.
He was, of course, the main protagonist for Dark Forces. He also stars in lots and lots of the Extended Universe books.
Yeah.
And has some very
ever since this game, he was a fan favorite.
I'm going to jump in real quick to share this little fun tidbit with fans, because it'll come up as we're going, but I like to present it all as one whole. The naming system for this series of Kyle Katarn games is freaking hilarious. We had Star Wars Dark Forces, then we had Star Wars Dark Forces 2, Jedi Knight, and then we had Jedi Knight 2, Jedi Outcast, and I was very disappointed when they didn't name the next one Jedi Outcast 2, and instead named it Jedi Knight Jedi Academy.
Yeah.
But it was just hilarious. I was just like, so we just sort of, Dark Forces 1, Dark Forces 2 became Jedi Knight 1, but it's not called that. And then, it was hilarious.
Did not understand naming conventions at the time, apparently.
Yeah, they still don't.
Great levels.
Video games.
Can't name things. Anyway. So you had Kyle Katarn. You also had the introduction of the Dark Troopers, which you saw. Yeah. I think I saw them a lot in games. I don't remember them a lot in books.
Not as much in books, from what I understand. They were mostly in games, particularly this series of games.
Right.
They appear in, like, Empire at War.
Right.
And like some of the mobile, like, they're primarily a game thing. I don't really. There was one. Oh no, that was a game too. I can't think of an example where they were in books.
They might have, but
yeah. And for those that don't know, the Dark Trooper project was initially started as a more advanced battle droid type trooper, but eventually became a stormtrooper exosuit.
Yeah, it kind of underwent different levels. Yeah, at first they were like super battle droids with like crazy programming, but then they were also troopers at some points, but then they were like cyborg troopers too at one point.
Yeah, there's been a lot of Dark Troopers.
There's a lot of iterations of that.
Yeah. And that's
my favorite, of course, is Phase 3 Dark Troopers.
The big bulky ones?
Yeah, with the rocket launchers.
That was the exosuit at that point, right?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Those were the best.
Basically, the Star Wars version of Spartans from Halo.
Yeah,
that's actually a very good comparison. Yeah.
The following year, in 1996, the magazine Adventure printed its final issue. So that was really all there was to it. I mean, they tried to do a gaming magazine, didn't really go anywhere.
Never really became Nintendo Power or anything.
Yeah. I mean, you had Nintendo Power, you had Game Informer, you had
a lot of
couple others.
Game Informer's like the only one still around.
Yeah, Nintendo Power did close.
Of those, yeah.
This is also about the time that point and clicks started to lose popularity and LucasArts starts to shift to other genres.
No more Day of the Tentacle, no more Grim Fandango.
The technology had advanced to the point that you would now do that in a more third or first person type setting rather than having a 2D sprite on the screen.
Well, Grim Fandango was it was not real 3D, but it was a 3D design.
And that still comes out later because they didn't cut off all production at that point.
And Grim Fandango, of course, is where you can only buy horror movie tickets.
Okay, got there.
Oh. Woo!
Thanks, Kyler. Thanks.
Yep. That's what I'm here for.
Now, this is where things start getting exciting for me. 1997, September. Star Wars Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2 releases.
Yes, where we discover that Kyle Katarn had the Force all along.
That's right. This introduces lightsaber combat, including the automatic blocking of blaster bolts back at attackers. Force powers, and they also did live-action cutscenes.
Yes.
There was this little phase in the gaming industry around that time.
Red Alert 2 with Tanya.
Yep.
Yeah.
They did. They would actually
good
film
times.
actors on a set in costume and just take that video file and put it in the game for in between levels to.
My favorite though is Red Alert with the grumpy American general with a toothpick because we can't show him smoking, but that's clearly what it was supposed to be.
Some ham. Yeah, I love those cutscenes
so
in
good.
Jedi Knight, but some hammy stuff. Yeah,
They're so excellent.
Yeah, they're usually terrible. Well, really terrible.
As far
but
as
in
the
a
quality of
campy-
those go, Jedi Knight was pretty solid. Actually,
Well, and
but
like,
even
and
then-
again, at the time, it was so cool.
no, and I'm saying
Oh,
as far
man.
as those go,
Yeah.
it was pretty solid. It's still not anything.
If you
that,
want a good, entertaining hour or two, go look up. I'm sure the cutscenes are all on
pull up
YouTube or
YouTube.
something, and just go watch these because they're fantastic.
We'll see. And watching that for Dark Forces 2 was what made me realize some things I'm just about to talk about. There is an MC-30 in the opening cutscene of
Are
Dark
you
Forces 2.
serious?
It's an MC-30.
Wow, that far back.
I know.
I thought it was invented for Empire at War.
So did I. Yeah, no, there was an
my
MC-30
goodness.
floating amongst the buildings of
Wow.
Nar Shaddaa in the
I
opening cutscene.
hate MC-30s. Ugh.
Yeah.
We'll talk about why when we get to
In our
Empire
Armada
at War.
episode. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
No, that's where my hate starts, is Empire at War.
The game also introduced branching morality paths, which was a staple of Jedi Knight games later.
Yeah.
And is also kind of starting the genesis of it in games at large.
no.
What did it beforehand?
Ultima is as far as morality systems in games. Ultima is for branching ones. I'm going to walk back on that. You may be right. I haven't really looked into branching ones, but
That was my
I've
own...
got a presentation on morality systems in games that I'm working on.
Oh, really?
And so, but I haven't looked into the branching ones yet. So
Because this was the first I could find. I hadn't ever read
okay,
anything
it might
about
be for
Ultima,
branching ones.
but-
So I'm going to walk back on that. I'm not as far as morality systems in games. That goes to Ultima 4. For branching ones, that could very well be. I have no idea. So
And what we mean by this is that you could choose, in Jedi Knight, you could choose between light side and dark side.
yeah,
And that would change. Well, I think actually they did it so that you could still take force powers from both, regardless of which you
But
took.
there was a point in the game where you chose
That's
your
right.
your decisions that you had made,
That's
the force
right.
powers that you had chose, influenced which path you took in the game. It would either switch to light side or dark side depending on how good or bad you had been.
Right. For future reference, the canon story of Kyle Katarn, though, was light side. So,
Is this the game that we would play, Ross, you and I would play with Braden?
Mhm.
Okay.
yeah,
Where you have
they're-
like the force speed and running
Yep.
out. Okay.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, so I've played this game, the
You
multiplayer.
had the
I
seven
played the
dark
multiplayer
Jedi
of
that
this.
you would fight as you went through, and it was good.
Yeah,
stuff.
so this was back in the day when you actually had to have LAN parties and haul your computers over to somebody's house. So I would I would go over and play this with Ross. He would have like a second computer set up, or Braden would bring
We would
one
do
of
it
his
down at
over,
Braden's, yeah.
and then we'd go to Braden's house. We ended up just going to our friend Braden's house because he had 3 computers all on a big round table, so we could all play at the same table together and curse each other out and stuff.
That was another one that I played so many hours
Yeah.
of.
Oh,
We
right.
did. We
I
put
played
a,
that
we
so
put a
many.
lot. in
That
there.
was one. That was. I think that was the very first Star Wars game I ever played. Was Dark Forces 2 Jedi Knight, and because I would get video games from my uncle because my uncle literally had just waist high stacks of video games along one wall in his basement where he'd play them and then set them over there, or just buy them and set them over there and never get around to them. And so he was just like, yeah, take what you want, play it, bring it back. And I was going through there and I was like, there's lightsabers. This is Star Wars. That's so good. I took that home and played that, and I played that game so many times.
From playing this game, because before this, I'd really only played single player by myself at like Age of Empires, But I remember, so I'd not really had a multiplayer experience, really.
Yeah.
So I remember we would go to Braden's house, and there was this one mission that they would always pick. Ross and Braden would always pick the same mission. It was so frustrating. It had this big chasm with a bridge across it, and then it was like a circle, like a circle hallway around the edges. Mm-hmm. And so I would always be like, there they are. I'm going to run over. I'm going to run across the bridge. And one of the two of them, without fail, fetching camp the other side of that bridge, and just as soon as I get close, force push off the bridge. And I'm like, how the fetch are you doing that? How do I counter this? How do I, didn't matter what they told me, try to help me out. It was just always force push, force push, force push.
For those of you that have played, that was the Canyon Oasis map that came with Dark Forces. There was also a modded one later that people made called Big Oasis that we liked a lot. But yeah, that was a fun map.
It was fun just to play and have a lightsaber, but I sucked so bad.
Testament to LucasArts design, just the way it was set up together. Again, I never played anything like Ultima or not Ultima, Unreal Tournament and things like that actually were dedicated multiplayer things. But level design was just awesome and interesting, and just there were
some solid stuff. Yeah,
great stuff. Dark Forces also has roots for, well, okay, I like to think this is the genesis of a lot of current canon ideas, but it probably isn't.
I agree, actually, that it is, with at least some of it. But anyway, go ahead.
For what we're about to talk about. So, at the end of Dark Forces 2, if you had the dark side path, there is an ending scene where your protagonist, Kyle Katarn, goes and talks to the number 2 Jedi under the big bad Jedi that you had just... Jedi. Yeah. Who lives in the campaign, like you ended up like sparing her life or something like that. Yeah. Anyway, you choose the dark side path, you end up meeting up with her, and it's revealed through the dialogue that you have taken over as the new Emperor. The approach to that scene is very, very, very reminiscent of the scene at the ending of Episode 2, when Count Dooku was giving the plans of the Death Star to then Darth Sidious. The color palette is the same, those dark browns and golds. You have a ship flying in through into a building that has a large hangar door that's like curved at the bottom. They're walking off the shuttle, and having this little conversation. It's all very
interesting.
reminiscent.
Yeah. See, I buy that specifically because there is so much in the prequels that was just very clearly drawn from these games.
Really?
Yeah. Well, like, for instance, the first time in the movies that you see, like, we think of, you use the Force to move things around and everything. In the original trilogy, that is mainly just used to move things to me or around or something. Vader uses it to throw stuff at Luke. Nobody ever uses it to move another person in any way. The Force push effect. The first time you see that in the movies is when Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon use that on battle droids. Yeah. In the opening sections of Phantom Menace. And I remember watching that in Phantom Menace and being like, they lifted that straight from the games. That's where that came from. Because I remember playing the games and there's all these things you could do that I was like, oh, that's neat. But man, you're overpowered compared to the movies. And then the prequels came along and started taking a lot of abilities from the games and making them canon. And it was very interesting.
Because the other things that I saw they're all Abrams post-buyout inspirations. In those opening cutscenes for Dark Forces 2, you also see a Force paralysis, like Kylo does.
Yeah, I remember that. That's right.
And it's kind of a paralysis.
It's not identical, but it's definitely similar.
He kind of stuns the guy, and the guy can't. There was, also cutting someone in half. This predated Episode 1.
Cutting someone in half, and they lived.
Yeah.
Yay! Oh, it's fantastic.
And then, yes, there was also the MC-30.
And I'm going to throw this down, and they lived in a cooler way than Darth Maul.
His little floating platform
he had this thing at the bottom of his waist, and he just floated around on that instead of getting lame robot legs. Why do that when you can hover?
Really cool robot legs. Let's correct that. Oh, they're so cool.
And so that was all I noticed from an opening cutscene. I wanted to go back and play through everything again to see them all, but that's a lot.
Who has that kind of time?
Yeah, that's a lot of hours.
If enough of you listeners start listening to this, that we can start making an income off of this, then we can totally just drop all our careers
absolutely
to play games and read Star Wars things full time.
It would be awesome.
That's never going to be a thing I do. But
I will do
Yeah.
it.
Okay, so
I would still be right.
So that was 1997. So now we move on to 1998, February. Star Wars Jedi Knight Mysteries of the Sith is released, which is an expansion
Oh my gosh,
to
hold on though.
Dark Forces 2.
97, this is released, cutting people in half, all that kind of stuff. 99, May 99 is when Phantom Menace is released, which means George Lucas is coming up with the story literally when this game is released. Yep. That doesn't surprise me at all that Darth Maul's cut in half, because he's probably looking at the game going, that sounds pretty cool.
I think George wasn't as heavily involved with development at this point. I want to say it was 1990.
Generally, he wasn't with most of these, but he still signed off on them.
Yeah, and if for major ideas like that,
quite possible. Yeah,
it's possible. And that's why I say these ideas might have inspired things, but it's also possible they didn't, because pushing people around is still a logical enough idea.
Yeah, but there's enough of them that I see that it's that I saw in the movies, and I was like, that is exactly we do see Luke force jump, quote unquote, in Empire Strikes Back, but it's kind of a blink and you miss it sort of thing that you never really see anyone do again.
Yeah.
Until the prequels.
Yeah, he has he runs and jumps off of the sail barge but it's not an overtly nobody can jump like that without some sort of extra power. Whereas in the prequels, they are just jumping around absurdly left and right, and then suddenly lose that ability when someone else has the high ground. But it's still, it was. I remember watching them jumping like that and being like, that is straight out of the games too. And so was this, and there's a lot of stuff came straight out of those games. Yeah, as far as I'm concerned. But
it would be interesting to find out. I'd love to actually interview someone.
George, we're coming for you.
Yeah, I know. Right, George. But someone that would have been on the production team for episodes 1, 2, and 3 to see if that was actually true.
Yeah.
Anyway, February 1998, Mysteries of the Sith was released. That's an expansion to Jedi Knight
Which
Dark
I
Forces.
entirely missed, so I was very confused when the actual sequel came out.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh. It has to deal with Kyle Katarn.
I have played this at this point.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah.
Well, also for those that are listening. This introduces a connection between Kyle Katarn and Mara Jade.
Yeah.
So Mara was one of the Emperor's,
Mara was one of the main characters. No, she was basically an assassin.
Okay.
She's an operative.
Hand of the Emperor.
Yeah, the Emperor would collect Force-sensitive people and kind of train them. And
enough that basically he trained her enough that he could send her messages from a distance, and sort of thing was how it worked. And his last command to her was kill Luke Skywalker. And so she had this burning obsession with killing Luke. And anyway, this is from the Timothy Zahn books that she became a very popular figure in the Star Wars EU, and eventually married Luke Skywalker.
And thank heaven that got erased. Ugh.
Oh, come on. You know what? And speaking of things that were erased and I think should be brought back, for me, this Dark Forces series, the whole Kyle Katarn, all those games that dealt with him, were the game versions of the Thrawn book series. Honestly, if you're going to bring anything back, it needs to be Kyle. And, I mean, of course, not all these plot points, because they do directly contradict new canon in some aspects now.
But I wouldn't mind seeing the characters still.
Yeah. Now, especially because Kyle later became in the books what people like to call a gray Jedi, where, I mean, he's on the light side, but he's very grumpy about it, is the easy way to put it. Had to dabble in the dark side. Actually, Mysteries of the Sith also shows him falling to the dark side.
He fell to the dark side, and then Mara brought him back.
It's also their explanation as to why he uses both light and dark side powers.
Yeah. It's also their excuse for you not starting with Force powers at the beginning of Jedi Knight 2. Is because he's forsworn using the Force because he doesn't want to risk falling to the dark side again. Which is why I was so confused at the beginning of that. I was like, wait, what?
Actually, yeah, another inspiration. Huh.
Potential inspiration, yep.
And then, so that was February of 98. In October of that same year, Grand Fandango releases, which is the first LucasArts point-and-click adventure to be more or less 3D.
Yeah.
So.
And is an excellent game. The controls still suffer from some... that's another problem of video game history, is that figuring out control schemes, what button to press to do what, and how it's going to react in the game has been a long and complicated process for video game designers. And so when you pick up some older stuff, they can be anywhere from frustrating and confusing to straight up just beyond understanding for a lot of modern video game players. And so it's where you'll have, especially because they would have manuals that came with the game, where they said they didn't have tutorial levels. They gave you a manual and said, all right, here, if you don't know how to do something, look it up in the book, which games do not do nowadays, which I can appreciate.
Yeah.
Like, but for a lot of younger players these days, it is beyond understanding.
Yeah, if any of you want to look up these old games, I do highly suggest it, but understand there will be a bit of a learning curve.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Even the games that seem like they're this basically works like there'll be weird like the fact like for Jedi Knight you had your regular jump button and then your force jump button.
Right, they were separate things.
Things, and then later they mapped those together. But
it was terrible.
Yeah.
Anyway,
but when you compare that to the ease of Destiny and Titanfall, where it's just double tap to jetpack, is far simpler, far easier.
Right.
They're still figuring a lot of things out. We all are with video games. But
yes. So, moving on, we then go to May 19th, 1999, when The Phantom Menace is released, just for point of reference for all of you. Next is 2000, March, Force Commander releases.
I thought this was older than 2000.
Well, and I think that's a problem with our perceptions, because this is still also just shortly after things like Age of Empires and StarCraft released.
Yeah, this is 5 years after Age of Empires, 3 years after StarCraft.
And 2 years after Age of Empires 2.
Yeah.
Right. So, and what we're referencing here, listener, is that, so those games that we've been talking about are all strategy games. Force Commander is also a strategy game. StarCraft, of course, is super big even now with their later editions. Age of Empires was competition for it back in the day. Both of those games were actually 2D, but they were done in such a way that they kind of faked 3D from a isometric perspective. Yeah. What that means is that you're not looking exactly top down, you're looking at it kind of from a corner. Yeah, like if you had a room, you're looking at it from the top right corner sort of thing. Yeah,
basically. You're up on the 13th floor looking down at an angle at all this stuff below you. And
so those games, StarCraft and Age of Empires at the time, were 2D sprites that where you just move around in ways to make it look like they're coming closer or farther away.
Same with Grim Fandango. Yeah.
Right.
Well, the sprites were 3D, but the way they moved is actually on a 2D plane with a 3D looking background. It's similar to what these games are doing. But
yeah, I need to look closer into how that was done. Now, Force Commander, and the reason why I wanted to put this in here is because I loved it.
It was such a good game.
But it actually had terribly mixed reviews. Some people hated it.
I loved it. This was another one of those games where Ross and I would go over to our friend Braden's house and play together because he had 3 computers. And we would play this game, and I'd go over to your house also.
I'm not sure. I don't know if it supported 3. Maybe you were going to Braden's on your own.
Maybe I was. But I remember playing with both of you.
They loved
this game. It was awesome.
The reason why this is important is because this is the first time you see 3D done in a strategy game.
Actual 3D.
Actual 3D, right.
Was it? This predates Empire Earth?
Oh,
I'm going to look it up. Anyway,
Empire Earth, was it actual 3D?
What year was this one?
Oh, yeah. Empire. Yeah, this is way before Empire Earth, Chris. Empire Earth was like 2004 or something like that.
Yeah, this was 2000.
Okay. Cool.
Again, this is coming shortly off of StarCraft and Age of Empires, so this is a big jump. Now, there were some concessions they had to make.
Empire Earth, I haven't thought about that game in a long time.
Actually, you moved some wheels in the back of my brain that haven't moved in years.
Jeez. Good game in some ways, not great in others.
Yeah. So the control scheme, you actually had control of the camera, and you could orbit around the field. You could zoom in and out. Yeah. You could, get up close and personal with a lot of the...
This was a year before Empire Earth. Yeah,
was it?
Boy, they came a long way in a year.
Yeah, they sure did.
Wow.
They had to make concessions with the maps. So like the terrains weren't as detailed, they weren't as pretty to look at. But you also had more realistic flight for your air units. Things like StarCraft, well actually Age of Empires didn't have any air units, but like StarCraft, what it was is you had a flying, finger quotes, unit that would just fly up to something and then just sit there as it blasted a thing when it looked like it should have been
zooming around.
Right. So Force Commander did that with their
air speeders, the snow speeders would actually fly around as they're attacking stuff, but they would have to then like go away and come back and then boom 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 and then fly away, come back. Like
yeah.
They did
And
a
at this
really
point,
good
I
job.
remember being really frustrated by that in Empire Earth with the planes. Anyway,
Yeah.
And at this point, you hadn't really seen that in games yet, so they were pushing boundaries that way. Also, I cannot find a copy of anywhere online.
Really?
Like, they just won't re-release it. They won't do
Bummer.
any updates on it. I know.
Can't even
I've
find
been
an
looking.
illegal copy. I mean, never mind. We would never do that.
And anyway, yeah.
When
we'll
I
just move on.
download games like that, it's because they're not available anywhere. I'm like, who am I stealing from?
And
There's no way to buy this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially with like LucasArts.
Yeah.
Anyway.
That's how I got Might and Magic 7, and I bought that when I got home from my mission because I was like, I love this game. It's not available anywhere anymore because 3DO had gone bankrupt and closed down
Right.
while I was on my mission, and so I came home and was like, well, where am I going to get that now? And so I downloaded it legally and was just like, if it's ever available legally, I will get rid of this and I will buy it legally, which I did have to do later. And I'm glad it's available, but
I did look through the more shady channels for a copy of this game because I remembered I would love a copy of it.
yeah.
But you can't find anything that's
Dang.
actually a standalone download. Everything still needs their updates for the CD install.
Yeah.
So anyway, still working on it. And if anyone has like a link to me or can pass me a link somewhere, I would be interested. Comment below.
Yeah.
So let's see, Force Commander releases. That's right. Okay. So the following year, 2001, in November, Galactic Battlegrounds releases, which is an Age of Empires reskin and not very well
Yeah,
done.
so I was so excited for this game because I love Age of Empires, and I'm like, if we take Age of Empires, which I love, and we make it Star Wars, which I love even more, how can we go wrong?
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, in almost every way. It was so not good. And I mean, even though it came out much later than Age of Empires 2,
nearly a year and a half after
Age of
Galactic-
Empires 2 came out in 98.
Right.
Then the expansion for Age of Kings came out in 2000. So 2 years after the latest expansion of Age of Empires, you get this game. You've had 2 years to work on it. The graphics looked exactly the same, which it's like, okay, that's a minor thing, but still, you guys have had 2 years. It should look 2 years better, you know?
Mm-hmm.
The gameplay was identical.
Mm-hmm.
They literally took Age of Empires and slapped Star Wars skin on it.
They did add an additional resource. You had
Yeah, but it didn't make
This was
hardly
which year?
any.
this was
2002?
2001.
Oh, 2001.
So this is at the
okay.
same time as Empire Earth, which is
Well,
that's
and it's
yeah.
a year
Yeah,
after
it's
Force
a
Commander.
much better
yeah,
game.
well, but that's especially coming out alongside that was so like, holy cow, look at this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was just so disappointing, and especially too with the, like Ross was saying for StarCraft, where the flying units fly up to the thing and then stop and hover while they pew pew whatever it is they're targeting. Where I had already played Force Commander, knew that you can actually make it look semi-realistic. So I'm expecting them to be like, okay, cool, we're going to take Force Commander, we're going to take Age of Empires, these two are going to have a baby, and it's going to be Galactic Battlegrounds, and this is going to be awesome. And it just wasn't. The flying units were exactly the same stupid, like, the Jedi Starfighters, you know, which you see them zooming around doing all this cool stuff in the movies, and they fly up, boo-boo-boo, boo-boo-boo, boo-boo-boo.
Yeah,
and it's just
static,
like, oh, it's so dumb. Oh, it was so frustrating.
One thing that they did do is that they put everybody in the game.
Yeah.
You had Republic, you had...
So that was with the expansion, which came out like a couple years after.
Well, sure.
But yeah.
but like you had Old Republic, you had Empire, you had Rebels, you had Gungans, you had Separatists, you had
Yeah, so
everybody
you had,
wants
you
to
had
play as the
clones
Gungans.
and Separatists, Empire and Rebels, Old Republic, which I guess was the clones.
clones, yeah.
And then, you had Wookiees as their own race.
That's right,
And
you had
Gungans.
Wookiees, yeah.
You had those 6 nations, basically.
Yeah.
Or civilizations, whatever. But it was also really kind of a bummer because one of my complaints with Age of Empires was that every civilization was essentially the same, and they had one unique unit per nation. So they didn't really feel all that different. Yeah.
Which, I mean, has its perks in just like everybody has the exact same toolbox to work
Well,
with.
and it's
but when you
roughly-
but when you put it next to something like StarCraft, it's like, no. This
Right,
isn't-
where there was a definite... Like, StarCraft is a great example of paper, rock, scissor.
Yeah.
Where, you know, that each nation or each race in StarCraft has a very unique feel to it. They have very specific strengths, which are good against some things and very weak against others.
And you need to adjust your playstyle depending on who you're playing against.
With Age of Empires, it was basically like it doesn't matter who you're playing against.
Yeah. You're going to get some minor...
relatively the same. And so with this, I was thinking, hey, great, we've got, Wookiees and clones and droids and stormtroopers, and they all played exactly the same. The only difference was the skin.
Yeah.
Like your basic infantry unit, blaster unit or whatever for the droids and the stormtroopers and the Wookiees and the clones and the Gungans. They had different animations, but the damage was the same. The upgrades for them were the same. So it really felt very, very, very bland. And for me, anyway, part of the reason I hate that game so much, I guess I don't hate it, but I dislike the game so much is my expectations were so high. Because again, in Force Commander, the Empire did feel different than the Rebels in how you played. Mm-hmm. And then Chris keeps bringing up another good game, Empire Earth, which was like Age of Empires in that you progressed technologically, but it went from like Stone Age to the future, which was really cool. And you had the 3D stuff, which was cool. Mm-hmm. The planes in that game actually did have to fly around and actually have little dogfights. Yep. But it did suffer from the same thing that no matter what nation you picked, it all was very similar. The same, and so I guess my expectations for Battlegrounds was so much more.
Yeah.
And then to just have it be so bland, it was so disappointing.
Well, it reeks of a cash grab.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
I should have thought about looking into the actual development cycle of this, but I didn't. Yeah. I think I'm going to go into it
honestly,
now,
because it really does feel like they were like, hey, that Age of Empires game is pretty popular. What if we just turned it Star Wars, put it out, slap it, that's exactly what happened.
Because, it wasn't even as fluid as what Age of Empires was. It was a reskin, but they broke things.
Yeah.
There were AI issues, the
AI was dumber than in Age of Empires.
Well, and I seem to remember some sort of collision issues, things would walk through other things, but now I can't remember the specifics.
That's true. Yeah, there was a lot of clipping and stuff between walking through buildings and whatever.
Yeah.
One thing that it did well and that could only happen in a Star Wars game was you could train Jedi Knights and Padawans and Jedi Masters and stuff. And that was cool to see them chopping with their lightsabers and stuff. And all it was, of course, was just a regular standard melee attack that just did way more damage. But the animation looked pretty cool, seeing them actually flash.
So did you have Wookiee Jedi Knights then?
No.
They did have some specifics. I think that would have been their unique units.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the Old Republic's unique unit was Jedi.
I've always wanted to see a Wookiee Jedi.
Hey, Clone Wars.
Yeah? Sweet.
It's a youngling, but it's still pretty cool.
Yeah. Anyway, so after that,
his lightsaber's made of Rosher tree wood.
Cool.
It's really cool looking. Yeah.
The following year, 2002, in March, Jedi Knight 2, Jedi Outcast is released. I know, this is where, it was great.
These two are going to go into a nostalgia.
No, I'm going to try not to, because I know we're going to do a video game episode later where we're comparing and stuff, so. But good game.
So, it refined the Force powers, again, what was most exciting to me was you put the Force jump on the jump button, rather than having a separate button. It also greatly refined the lightsaber combat.
Yes.
That was a lot of fun. Because you didn't just have, your lightsaber, you had light, medium, and heavy attack styles.
Yeah.
And there were also some simple combos as well.
Yeah.
My favorite was to stay in the medium medium stance, and then they had this one little flip move where you would jump over the top of your opponent, make a sweeping slash downward, and then he would kind of finish the flip and land on his feet on the other side.
So earlier in the episode, Chris complimented Ross for being a scholar and a gentleman, for being willing to play through and have things ready for me. That ended with Jedi Outcast. I would go over to Ross's house and he'd be like, watch me play this game for 4 hours. I love this game so much. And I would watch it, and it was cool. And I'd be like, hey, can I play? And he'd be like, yeah, in just a minute. And an hour would go by. It's like, well, I gotta go home, Ross.
I always remember.
That only happened once. Come on.
I hold no ill will against him because I was the exact same way playing Age of Empires.
Yeah.
And Ross would come over and watch me play, but it was just funny.
I always remember Jedi Knight 2, aka Dark Forces 3, aka Jedi Outcast. For that. But yeah, for being the game that made lightsaber combat look like lightsaber combat.
Yeah.
Like, it looked like actual duels where blades are connecting
was this the
and
game where the
blocking each
lightsaber would
other.
hit the wall and it would like turn orange where it cut the wall and stuff?
Yes,
because I remember Ross
Yeah.
would like write his name like a sparkler like in the wall with his lightsabers.
And you also had dismemberments, like you could cut people's arms off.
And
it was a pretty
and
cool
if you
game.
and if you knew the cheat code, you could ramp that up to 11.
Yes,
Which was delightful.
This game did a ton for
And
games.
it was a pretty dang solid story. Like,
Yeah.
it was a lot of fun. I liked it, start to
good
finish.
times.
I had something I was going to say, now I forgot. Oh, that's right. I was going to also say, this was, lightsaber combat was made so it looked better, looked more like the movies. That was still, we only had seen episode 1 at this point, because episode 2 releases in May of this year.
Oh.
So the game released in March, 2 months later was episode 2.
They're wetting your whistle for the movies.
Yeah, I think this is probably the start of...
Let's tie it in with a movie release kind of a thing.
Yeah, let's put those together when it's on everyone's mind. So yeah, May 2002, Attack of the Clones releases.
Oh, that makes sense too because never mind. I was looking at the wrong year. Never mind.
So the following year, in June of 2003, Star Wars Galaxies releases, which is Star Wars' first foray into the MMO.
Yes,
it was essentially WoW, but Star Wars.
Well,
actually,
kind of.
no.
Tried to be.
No. The one that came later, The Old Republic, was WoW.
Yeah,
this
there
one
we
was
go.
before that.
Yeah.
I didn't get the chance to play this because I didn't have
I
internet
played
connection at the time.
a very little bit. It was not impressive.
There were a lot of things that sounded awesome. You could not play Jedi, if I remember right. At least not in the beginning.
Yeah, you had to earn it or something. Which,
Right. Well, and I think,
which made sense because that was always one of my problem with MMOs, Star Wars based MMOs, was I was just kind of like, if I have the ability to be a Jedi, I'm going to be a Jedi.
yeah.
It's the always be Batman rule, but for Jedi, like, I'm not going to be anyone else.
right. They did do things like you had a ship that you could fly around. Apparently, again, I never played it. I just remember Braden talking about taking a ship, and you always had to have it like in orbit around a station, or else you would get destroyed by other players if you were outside of that protection zone. But anyway,
Briefing, my friend.
It was not generally well reviewed.
yeah. I mean, it was the thing. It made big
It
waves
lasted for a long time.
It did.
It did.
It had a good, solid cult following. But yeah, it just wasn't very well.
I remember when it finally got shut down, most of the articles were like, hey, did anyone know this was still a thing? Because apparently it just got shut down.
Yeah, I made a note of that somewhere when it was shut down, but I can't.
We'll get to it.
We'll get to it. Yeah, in a minute. Let's see.
Dang, so 2003 was a huge year. I'm looking at your notes, Ross.
Yes, the last half of the
June
90s.
was Star Wars Galaxies. July, KOTOR comes out.
And KOTOR being
then
Knights of the Old Republic.
Right.
And then September, Jedi Knight, Jedi Academy.
Comes out.
Dang. That's
Which is
a
Dark Forces 4.
huge year for Star Wars.
It was. Well, see, the latter half of the 90s and the first half of the 2000s were honestly like the golden age of LucasArts, because all those awesome games that you really remember, with the exception of the point and clicks from earlier, all came out within that set of
Even
Yes.
Grim Fandango was in
That's
that
honestly,
set.
that's the decade. 95 to like 2005. And then like a little buffer on either end of that.
Couple notable references.
Yeah.
Notable games on the other side. But yeah, this is really where things kind of really started to take a turn for LucasArts, because after Jedi Academy releases, which again was just an upgrade to Jedi Outcast, more saber styles.
Man,
they did also
less innovative. Like, they gave some neat upgrades, but it wasn't the enormous step that earlier games did.
and I never played KOTOR or Jedi Academy or any of those games because that was not really my playstyle. I was much.
KOTOR?
You need to.
No, you bought it for me on Steam. I played it for a little bit. I didn't really like it that much. I'm sorry, Chris.
That's okay. I mean,
I'm sorry.
if it's not your thing, it's not your thing.
That's
but wow.
because I was always more strategy games. So if there was a good
and I never
strategy
was.
game, that was my jam. And so I never played these games. But I remember seeing KOTOR fetching everywhere that you couldn't like spit and get away with not hitting something related to that game.
It's funny for me because for some reason, I thought KOTOR was an MMO when it came out. And so I wasn't interested because I tried to play Galaxies and our internet connection was really spotty and it wasn't even worth trying. I played a tiny bit of it on just the free sample sort of thing, free demo, and then never touched it again. And so when KOTOR came out, I was just sort of like, It wasn't until 2008 that I finally bought. I found KOTOR in Walmart and picked it up and was like, I was always sad that this was an MMO because it looked really cool. And then flipped it over, was reading on the back, and I was like, wait,
how did I miss this?
this isn't an MMO. I'm getting one.
Yeah.
And my computer was not good enough at the time, so I didn't get to play it.
Yeah,
when
I
it
wouldn't have been
released,
able to play it even if
anyway.
I had tried to. But
So yeah, you had those three powerhouses right at the end.
That surprises me that that's all in that same year, because
Mm-hmm.
like those are three of probably the biggest names in Star Wars gaming history, like period.
Yep.
And for them all to come out in that same year, like that is a killer year for LucasArts.
And this is where we crest. I mean, this is the top of the hill,
Yep.
right? Because in April 2004, so the following year, the restructuring of LucasArts due to apparently low earnings. Wait a minute.
2003.
I put 2013, but that's not right.
That can't be right.
Now we're going to have to look up. I know they did do a restructuring in 2004, but I'm not sure if Jim Ward was put in yet now at this point. I want to say so. And also, I don't think it was due to the low earnings again because of...
Those were such killer games. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
got to be
amazing
something
games.
else. Anyway, there was a restructuring in 2004.
Yes. And a new president was put in at that point. So you have April. Then in September, you have the first Battlefront.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So, September of 2004, oh my gosh, we played so much Battlefront.
And we would have been out of high school at that point.
Yes.
We were just graduated.
Yeah. We played a lot of this.
Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah.
So many hours. Like, if Xbox One had been able to track your hours like Steam does, this still might be my top played game of all time. Like, we played this game so much. Like, this was the game, like, this was kind of like Halo. Yeah. Where we would be like, okay, this is the Saturday, guys, where we're all playing. We would all show up at like Ross's house or Caleb's house or somebody's house, and we would play from dawn till dusk. And like, we would go get pizza at Little Caesars or whatever. Like, this was the all-day game that we would play. Oh my gosh, we played so much of this.
Even my two sisters got into it at the time.
Yeah.
They would.
I remember that actually a couple of times where they were like, hey, can we play? And I was like, girls, fine. And then they were actually kind of good. And I'm like, oh, I better pay attention to what I'm doing.
Because they would play on their own without me.
Yeah, and I didn't know that. So I'd be like, oh, Ross's little sisters, whatever. I'm going to totally cream them. And then I'm like, oh, shoot, I'm getting like spawn camp. I need to like up my game, you know? Yeah, this game is so good. I still play this game. Number one, the original Battlefront. I still play it. My kids love it.
Most of the time, but yeah.
I pull 2 out when I want to play better heroes.
Yeah.
Because in 1, they don't really have heroes.
Didn't have heroes.
I like the maps better on 1.
Yeah.
In a lot of cases. Like, they got rid of Renvar for number 2, which Renvar is awesome. But my kids, like my twin girls, play Battlefront about mixed between 1 and 2. But yeah, this is such a great game, which makes EA's disappointment all the more disappointing. Because they build it as, hey, remember that game that you really, really loved that was totally awesome? We're going to make it look really pretty and give you that to you again. Mm-hmm. And then it was steaming turd pile. Oh my gosh.
Well, we should specify Battlefront 1, while it was not the same mechanics, was a decent as far as gameplay goes. I mean, it was just your standard
EA's
shooter.
Battlefront?
Mm-hmm.
Or
the first one, because now they have 2, and it's the second one I think you might be thinking of.
Okay, no, I'm thinking of the first one.
I played the first one,
I played the first one. I played for about an hour total, and I was like, hey, I've now done everything this game has to offer. And it's
without paying out the nose to get past the paywalls. But
the first one didn't have really much.
Battlefront 1 was not as bad.
The only paywalls were, do you want to be a stormtrooper without his helmet and have different heads?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the only thing you could pay for, which was
obviously
totally dumb.
I didn't play that one very much.
Yeah. It was so disappointing.
We're actually going to get to that a little bit later, but the theory behind EA's first Battlefront was to make it a little bit more accessible to a general audience. And so they wanted to go more the Call of Duty route, which it was. I mean, it was basically the same as Call of Duty.
Oh, it's awful.
Which was its
That's
largest
why
flaw.
I don't play Call of Duty.
Gameplay itself was solid, but again. Anyway, we'll get to that later. So, you have So in September, Battlefront, the original Battlefront releases. In December of that year, Knights of the Old Republic 2 releases. So that's just a year and a half after the first game.
KOTOR 2 was an interesting experience.
I never played it.
I did.
I know the reviews weren't as good.
It's broke.
Is it?
It is developmentally flawed. And I mean that in the sense that it's just like, it's pretty clear that at some point they just had to rush it out to meet the due date. Development got rushed, and it's not finished. It's not complete.
This is the unfortunate thing though with all developers, is they're like, the game must come out on this day.
Yeah,
and
that happens.
Put it out
not all,
whenever
but
it's
yeah,
done. That's
but
so sad when that happens.
That was the hallmark, and that was the beginning of the downfall of LucasArts.
Now, and KOTOR wasn't actually made by LucasArts. It was KOTOR 2 wasn't actually made by LucasArts.
But they would apply pressure to other studios under the same.
Yeah. And there is some really quality stuff in KOTOR 2. There was some great ideas, some great writings, but at the end of the day, it just failed on execution and was incomplete.
Right.
Which is sad. Because there was some really solid stuff.
Well, and it was with such success in the first one. I mean, it's too bad. Oh, and I was going to also addendum my Kyle Katarn was the Thrawn series of games. KOTOR 2 is also up there.
KOTOR in general.
I'm sorry, KOTOR in general.
KOTOR was a big series, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean,
very influential.
If you're going to bring anything from the games back, it's those two things.
And that's what I keep hearing online and stuff, is everybody is like,
everybody wants Kyle, everybody wants Darth Revan.
So I'm on the Fantasy Flight Games Armada and Legion forums quite a bit. I'm on those because I like those games quite a bit.
I know it.
And that is those are the things that keep popping up, is like, well, if they need ideas, they could pull from KOTOR, or they could, we need Kyle Katarn as an upgrade. He should be a commander. Everybody loves these guys.
Yeah.
And I just sit on the outside because I never played either of those games, so I have no idea.
So, the following year in May, so 6 months after KOTOR 2 releases, Revenge of the Sith is released in theaters.
So good.
In October of that year, Battlefront 2 releases.
Even better.
Again, also, good game.
Yeah. A lot of fun.
A lot of fun to play.
Added in Jedi heroes that you could play.
Man, there's I think it's Polis Massa, the map on Battlefront 2.
I love the map on Polis Massa.
Caleb always wanted to play as
Darth Maul.
Darth Maul.
Yep.
And he would get in that fetching hallway and throw his double-sided lightsaber that took up the entire hallway.
Yep.
And just, you couldn't get past him. Yep. Oh my gosh.
And I would...
Caleb, you're a cheeser if you're listening.
I would play solo on Polis Massa, and I would save... I wouldn't bother even trying to capture the flag. Like, I would go once as a normal character, capture the flag so I'd get enough points to play as a hero, and then I would play as Darth Maul, and I would just carve my way through those halls endlessly. And because, if you're playing as a hero in that game, if you kill someone, then the amount of time you have as the hero goes up. If you kill an enemy, it goes down if you kill an ally. Or if you get injured, that's basically your life bar. But because the confines of Polis Massa were so narrow, and Darth Maul had that double-bladed lightsaber that made it impossible to miss, you could play as... I would play as Darth Maul for 20 minutes at a time before they finally windowed me down, or I finally accidentally killed enough of my own people to lose my time.
I would hate that too, because you'd be like, oh sweet, there's 12 clones coming at me. Awesome. Throw your lightsaber, and then 4 battle droids come in behind them and you chop them down too, and you're like, dang it guys, stay out of the hallway, I've got this covered.
See, and I wouldn't bother. I would literally just carve my way through whatever was in my path, including my own people. And then I'd finally run out of time as Darth Maul, go capture the flag again and do it again.
They did tweak the gameplay a little bit in number 2.
Yeah.
It was a little bit better. And the heroes did feel a little bit more...
Yeah. Number 2 was where I
stuff,
came to that game.
Mm-hmm.
Because it wasn't originally released on PC and I didn't have an Xbox, so...
Yeah. That was a good game.
I was actually the opposite. I played Battlefront 1, but I don't remember why I never got Battlefront 2. Just never been around to it. But anyway.
I have both still.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
I have number 2 on Steam. So.
We just got an Xbox One, and fortunately, both Battlefronts are games that...
Are they backward compatible?
Yeah.
They've added it to the backward compatibility.
Call it by its proper name. It's the X-Bone.
Yeah, the X-Bone.
Yeah. All right, so Battlefront 2 releases in October. The following February, 2006, is when Empire at War releases. This is where Star Wars strategy games finally actually worked.
Oh, this game was so good. Oh, well, it's so good for like 2 hours. And then it gets repetitive.
Well,
on the
yeah.
Galactic Conquest mode.
Yeah.
I'm gonna share with the
This game
audience
is so
my
good.
experience with this game, Galactic Empire. So the expansion,
Empire War.
Empire at War. Sorry, the original game you could play as the rebels or the Empire, right? And then the expansion added the consortium.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
Zon
Zan
Consortium.
Zon Consortium, where you could play as basically the mafia, this really, really beefed up mafia.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so I had never played this game, and Ross and Kyler found that out and went, "You've never played Empire at War?" And I was just like, "No." And they're like, "Okay, no, dude, you've got to get this, and you've got to get the expansion so that we can play with three groups." And I was like, "There's a third group? How could there be a third group? Like, that makes no sense." And they're like, No. See, Ross always plays as the Rebellion, Kyler always wants to play as the Empire, and you will want to play as these people because they are unscrupulous, horrible mafia. And I was like, that doesn't
appeal.
Yeah, they're mafia pirates, I think.
Mafia pirates. And I
Yeah.
was just like, you're selling me on this, yeah.
Yeah.
So I bought that, I played it a few times, and then they're like, yeah, come on, we're gonna play together, the three of us. We played one game, which I won, because both of them were so focused on each other as the main
It
threats.
was so frustrating.
That they windowed each other down, and then I was able to wipe them out.
And also, they were a little bit, the consortium was a little bit open.
A little bit OP? Excuse me.
All of their...
But let's not lie. The reason I won is because I
hold
was
on.
inexperienced and they were both going easy on me and focusing on each other.
OP, for those of you uninitiated, is
Okay.
overpowered.
Yeah.
Oh, and they were
Yeah.
very OP.
But,
Their capital ships, those special
Well,
weapons.
and
were
see,
so
that was
I
the
won
thing.
that, and then I have never played it in multiplayer again.
Yeah.
Because
So we
I don't
can
want
go
to
out on
tarnish
top.
my perfect record. Because that is how I do.
We might force him to play for this show.
See, no, actually, I've been thinking about that. Well,
Yeah.
more on that later. The problem with that, though, when they did add in that consortium, all of their units, like if you were to take like all of their fighters and line them up and do the stats all side by side, and all of their capital ships all side by side,
Yeah.
their
Consistently better. than
consortium,
both.
was all consistently better in each of those groups. And so, in other words, you had to go to the next tier up to really effectively defeat the thing that was next tier down.
Huh, that's interesting.
Fighters were stronger.
Yeah,
They
like
were-
their basic fighter, the Star Viper fighter, was easily a match, like one-on-one, easily a match for either X-Wings or TIE Fighters.
Easily, yeah.
like, no
I would
question
wager
about
that
it.
they did that to try and lure people into playing as the party that no one's ever heard of.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think that's part of the reason why.
They had these cruisers that could cloak.
I did like
That
those.
was ridiculous.
I liked those.
Fortunately, they didn't have shields, so when they uncloaked, it was like, hey, gun you down
Yeah.
before you cloak again. But they had, like, the mass drivers that would, like, punch through your shield. It was ridiculous. And this game is what has brought me a deep and abiding hatred for two Star Wars ships in particular. The MC-30, which Ross mentioned earlier, affectionately nicknamed the Shrimp from Armada. So Armada brought it in from this game. I hate this ship above all others. So it's in Empire at War. This ship was super dang fast. So Empire at War did one thing really cool that you had not seen before: hard points on ships. So each ship had
Not in
like
strategy games, but yeah.
in strategy games, you had like your Star Destroyer would have an engine hardpoint and a shield hardpoint and a hangar hardpoint, and then various turbo lasers and ion cannons and whatever. And so you could pick apart a little ship. You could disable the engines on a ship and it would go slow.
Yeah.
Or disable the shields and how it can't regenerate shields or whatever.
Or get rid of the gun emplacements on your side, and so it has a hard time.
Yeah,
doing it.
you get rid of the gun emplacements on the left side of the ship. It's got to swing around so it can fire at you from the right side, which was a really, really cool, innovative mechanic for a strategy game, which I loved it. So the theory, of course, is that if you destroy the engines, they are only going to move at a snail's pace. Not so with the MC-30. You can destroy the MC-30's engines, and they will drop down from super ridiculously fast to just regular ridiculously fast. They could still, with their engines destroyed, still move faster than your Star Destroyers with full engines.
Because that was the point of them, is they're an anti-capital ship.
And not only that, they had 4 rapid-fire torpedo launchers on the front of the thing. So and torpedoes in this game bypass shields. So and they were dirt cheap for a capital ship. absolutely just pennies to make these things. So you would have the AI be like, oh, I'm going to bring in 47 of these things and just keep throwing them at you. And they're super fast. And even if you're tractor beaming them, and their engines are... Okay, to get an MC-30 down to a Star Destroyer's full speed, you had to destroy the engines and be tractor beaming them. And even then, they could still fly out of tractor beam range and then disengage the tractor beam and still come around again later. Like, so ridiculously OP for the price that they were. So ridiculous. And then the other one that I hate almost as bad is the Assault Frigate. Mark II. A, because it is possibly the ugliest ship ever created for Star Wars. I hate the look of it. It doesn't look like a Star Wars ship to me. It is super ugly. They had way too many turbo lasers for their price. And they have the same, although not quite as fast as the MC-30, the same idea that, like, you can still knock out the engines, still be tractor beaming them, and they're just like, whatever, we're going to ignore it. So fast. And just... And whenever I would play Ross, he'd be like, I know what I'm bringing to this battle. Let's bring in 4,000 MC-30s and 2,000 assault frigates for backup. And he would spam those. It was ridiculous.
Well,
absolutely ridiculous.
I was more partial to the calamari cruisers, but still.
But MC-30s
you have to bring it up.
It was ridiculous. So I hate those ships. And Armada was basically like, hey, you know all those things that you hated about it in Empire at War? Let's just do that all again. Not as bad with the assault frigates, but the MC-30s are way too good for their price in Armada. Oh, they're so awful. I hate anytime anybody brings them, I'm just like, ugh. I don't care what else is on the table. Those ships are going down first.
Yeah.
Oh,
they're a lot of fun.
Man. Good game overall, though.
Very good game.
Yes.
Especially with some of the mods on the Steam community. Oh, man.
Yeah.
They're so good.
Other than what we've talked about that this game did, it also... it wasn't the first time you had seen, but it was just another installment of building squads as units instead of individual units.
Right.
Battle for Middle-earth had already done it, but that's the only one I know of.
Yeah,
beforehand.
that's true. So you would, for example, build a TIE fighter squad, and instead of getting a single TIE fighter, you would have a squad of 7.
Right.
That functioned as a individual unit.
Yeah.
And also... That same year, so this is February of 2006 when that releases. The expansion releases in October of that same year.
Yeah.
So, then we move on to February of 2008. So it must have been Jim Ward that I was talking about before who was put in. Because I have down that in 2008, Jim Ward leaves, citing personal reasons. And Daryl Rodriguez, who is a former EA chief operating officer, takes over in April. I put in that note of EA Chief Operating Officer just to kind of foreshadow how things go later. More on that in a minute. September of that year...
In case you're wondering, EA, we are blaming you.
Yeah. In September of 2008, The Force Unleashed releases on console.
That was a fun game.
It was a good game. It gets mixed reviews, but it becomes the fastest-selling Star Wars game of all time at roughly 4.5 million units in the first few months.
I thought the story had some good things, some not good things, but there was no denying that the combat, the actual playing of it, was a ton of fun.
The philosophy going into that game is, what if you had a Force user and just turned up his abilities to 11? I think that's the way they put it.
Yeah, I think that was actually part of the marketing.
Where you're literally using the Force to pick up ATST scout troopers, scout walkers, the chicken walkers,
and throw them into
throw them into things, or just crumple them up.
Yeah,
and
it was awesome.
It was one particular scene where your protagonist pulls a Star Destroyer out of low orbit.
Yeah, it was absurd next to what they've shown as actual canon. Yeah. But it was a lot of fun.
It was so fun though.
I'm going to talk about that more specifically below because there are also several other things in a minute.
I just remember going into group because like a lot of games, you'll play through the story and it's like you can either play this on a harder difficulty or keep all your powers at the same difficulty and just start over, which I would always do, and then just go into rooms full of stormtroopers and just be like, Force lightning! You're all dying. It was awesome. What a good game.
Let's see. So now we jump forward 2 years for May 2010. Daryl Rodriguez steps down as president in June, and Paul Megan from Epic Games steps in. In September, LucasArts downsizes by 1/3. They lay off 1/3 of their development teams. In October, The Force Unleashed 2 is released. Reviews are poor and is followed by more layoffs.
Yeah, I never even got that one.
I did. I still enjoyed it. It also actually has a future canon reference in it.
Oh, yeah?
Force Unleashed 2 has a blind Jedi.
Oh, well, he was in Force Unleashed.
He was in Force Unleashed, yeah.
Well, he becomes blind in the second one, doesn't he?
No.
Was it in the first one?
He's like the first Jedi you go and attack.
Yeah.
And he like gets busted out of the space station and like whatever, he survives Leia style, I guess.
Oh.
And then he later is like your literal blind wise old
your
mentor.
mentor, yeah.
You find him drunk in a cantina and you have to like kill all the guards and like
For some
shake
reason,
him, like
And
slap him
unlike
around and be
certain
like,
things
wake up.
that come later, we're not trying to pretend that he's not a Jedi.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, no. I'm not talking about Chirrut. I'm talking about Kanan from Rebels.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Because,
Well,
spoilers, he's blinded at one point, and so it has to use the Force to actually function. And that's the way this
And
guy...
his look is actually very
is.
similar to Rom Coda is the
Rom
character's
Coda,
name.
yeah.
And he is in one.
So,
Yeah.
for some reason I thought he was in 2. Anyway, it's been years since I've played those games. Let's see. Oh, I'm going to talk about those more below, because there was some more drama in that time period. Let's see. So, Force Unleashed 2 is released. So now in December of 2011, Galaxies shuts down. The Old Republic MMO is also released in that same time period. I believe it was the same month, if I remember right. So
That's still around, isn't it?
it is. The Old Republic MMO was developed by BioWare, who is basically the name in story-driven RPGs. Let's see. The game is fine, but it doesn't stay in the limelight very long when it's kind of realized that it really is just a WoW clone. I mean, it's striking. I mean, it's all set up the same. The way that you use your abilities, the classes and the factions interactions and the dungeons you go into. It is just a WoW clone, just a Star
for
Wars.
me, Old Republic was just yet another iteration of, I hate MMOs. Why does everyone keep taking my favorite series and making MMOs out of them? I know it's money. I know why they do it. But it was just this constant ongoing thing of just like, look, I know you want the money. I get that that's a thing, but at the same time, the majority of your fan base is playing your games because they don't want to play MMOs. If we want to play MMOs, we'll go play World of Warcraft. Yeah. Especially if you're just going to make a clone of it. Like, I mean, making a Star Wars clone of it, I can see the appeal there. Mm-hmm. I'll play a lot of things just because Star Wars is involved, but Angry Birds Star Wars, for instance, which is a great little game. But anyway, yeah.
Let's see. It's released its most recent expansion in December of 2016. The game producer said in the January of this year that they are working on things and has alluded to something being released in December or January.
So the developer said in January
of this year,
2018,
right,
that in January or February of 2019 there will be something
of December or January, December 2018 or January 2019.
Gotcha.
Yeah. They haven't announced anything currently, so I doubt it's going to be this year. They'll probably push that back because again, that was in January when they said it, and they've had other things come up. The community theory is that it's only a skeleton crew working on the Old Republic right now because they're also getting ready to release Anthem, which is going to be sort of a semi-MMO. I mean, it's MMO first-person shooter. It's kind of a weird mix of several different genres. That's going to be released in February. EA hasn't released player counts, by the way, of the Old Republic in several years, and the gamers' forums are guessing that the player counts are somewhere under 100,000.
That is not good.
Well, for MMOs, excluding WoW, that's actually okay. And that's usually about what they'll sit as for an adequate player base. But we always compare that against World of Warcraft that's had, I think it was as high as 14 million at its height and sits somewhere, I think it's the high single digits of million. So I think it's like 7 or 8, if I remember right. But
it is king.
It is. It absolutely is. But it should be known that those player numbers will spike at the release of an expansion and taper off. So if they are planning on releasing something in the next few months, that will probably change. You'll probably get a lot of people coming back. We'll see. In August of 2012, Paul Megan leaves. So he was the one that was just put in.
Wow, they had rapid turnover there.
They had a huge turnover. And Kevin Parker and Gio Gorsi, I think is how you pronounce that name, were put in as co-leads. So this is shortly before the Disney acquisition. Again, that was August. In October, Disney announces it's acquiring all the subsidiaries. And then we get to the fateful day of April 3rd, 2013. LucasArts closes the development studio, and in its press release says that less than 10 people remain to run LucasArts as a licensor only. All current projects are canceled or put on hold. This includes 1313, which...
Oh, man. Moment of silence for that game.
Yeah.
Shoot.
Well, we're going to talk about that in a minute. They did have several announced projects that they had put a name to a couple of them, and they had kind of just vaguely said we're working on games in certain genres. The 1313 might have been the open world RPG they said they were talking about. There was a Darth Maul game that was in the early stages of development that was canceled. An FPS, that's all we really know about that one. An aerial combat, which might have been what is known as attack squadrons, and an online service which they claim would revolutionize the industry, where what they said they're working on, but we didn't really have names. We then jump forward to September of 2015. Star Wars Uprising releases, which is a mobile action RPG, but it shuts down in November. Uprising was interesting because it was an actual decent kind of Diablo style, over the head. I'm sorry, isometric. Yeah, looking down from the 13th floor again view RPG. Interesting story. I played it in the beginning, but it just didn't catch me, which apparently was the same as everyone else because it shuts down that same year.
So it releases in September, and by November it's shut down. That sucks.
Yeah. It failed to thrive is basically what it was.
If your game is only live for 2 months, you made a sucky game. I'm sorry.
Well, that's the thing, though, is that I didn't have anything in particular that was wrong with it.
I never even heard of it.
I know. Yeah, because it wasn't hardly ever announced. I mean, the gameplay was solid. It wasn't buggy. I don't know. I couldn't pinpoint anything that really shut it down.
Fascinating.
Editor's note. The game was actually closed a year after it was released, not 2 months. That was my mistake in my notes. Apologies. Back to our show.
Let's see. In November of 2015, Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes launches on mobile. Wildly successful, still is around today.
Yeah, I get ads for that a lot.
Yeah, it's you take a team. They called it a collectible RPG. You play a level, you have a certain number of characters, and you just face off against other groups of enemies, and you collect pieces to let you unlock other characters, and you rinse and repeat. In November 2016, the Battlefront reboot releases. So this is the EA Battlefront 1.
This is the bad one that we were talking about.
Well, finger quotes, bad one. It sells 10 million by January, which beats the sales of Force Unleashed by 117%.
Yeah.
So
I was going to say, like you were saying earlier, it's just like, yeah, Disney moving their games to EA was a bad choice. And I'm like, well, it depends on what metric you're grading by. Money-making metric, no, it's really not.
I mean, it made a whole bunch of money. It was generally well-reviewed.
By people who apparently don't have taste.
No, he's not right, or he's not wrong, though. It got good reviews by all these companies and whatever, but then all the players are going...
Most of the people who were picking it up because they loved the original Battlefronts.
Right.
Were
Those are the ones that don't
reviews.
like it.
Yeah.
Those that just wanted a decent shooter liked it. Yeah. So
all I'm saying is I got it not long after release. A friend of mine he had bought the game and then later won a download code a free download code for the game. So he's like, I know you love Star Wars, here, have this code. Mm-hmm. Cool, I'm going to get this game. Awesome. But I'd already heard some bad grumblings about it, that they were like, this is kind of a disappointment. I got on, and it was very difficult to find people to play with, and this was not long. It was only like maybe 2 months after it came out. Really? It was hard to find people to play with because nobody was playing the game.
I played it at launch, and of course didn't have those problems, obviously, because it was at launch. I found myself doing better in matches than I expected, which I think was part of their design philosophy for it. Again, they wanted to leave it more accessible for people, for a general community coming into shooters. Failed to keep me, which I guess was the same as
and that's else. The thing is, I came in not long after, and I would spend 10 minutes, honestly, looking for players to have enough people to do a match. 15 minutes.
I had custody of someone else's PlayStation 4 for a little bit, or we were holding on to that for them, and so I just played their account of
Yeah.
that, and it was like we had that for a couple months, and I played that game. It was on there the whole time. I played that like 4 times, and then I was bored.
Yeah,
So
and
there's
well, and
nothing
that's the
here.
thing is, after about an hour of playing, where I did kind of all the different game modes, I'm like, oh, okay, so I've literally played for like an hour and 15 minutes, and I've done everything this game has to offer.
Mhm.
And the only
and it's not very repeatable. Like
It's
does
not, like-
not have solid replay value.
because the nice thing about the original Battlefront is you're playing against hordes of AI, but it had good replayability. It felt
Yeah.
like this one, the AI I didn't feel like the AI was as good.
They did want it more focused on player-to-player interaction.
Yeah,
than
but
the last one.
But they failed to bill it that way, which I think because they were basically like, remember that old game? We're going to give you that, only it's going to look really, really pretty.
Yeah.
And then
And
what
it
we
did.
got,
Looks pretty
and it
lovely.
did look really pretty, but what we didn't get was that old game.
Right.
Which is how they build it. And so
Right.
everybody was like, well, then why are we here? And then even the multiplayer stuff, though, wasn't all that fun, I didn't think.
That was one complaint, was that they didn't have a single-player component to it. It was all multiplayer.
Yeah.
But that's why I couldn't play most of the game, is because I didn't have a PSN account, and so I couldn't do online play with that
Well, and
PlayStation.
they
because it
did
wasn't
have
mine.
like a single player version at launch. They did, but it was like, oh, you need to survive 4 waves of baddies.
Well, tutorial doesn't count. That's not the single-player.
No, but they had a little bit of single player stuff.
But it
because
was
I did
terrible.
not have online play, and so there was very little I could do in that game. And even that, I was just like, where are the options that I used to have? Like, where?
Well,
is
and it was dumb too, because like with the old Battlefront, the good one, you started out when you very first bought the game, you could only play as the base class, the regular generic clone trooper or B1 battle droid or stormtrooper. But then you played, you win a couple of missions, and it's like, cool, now you can be a jet trooper, or you can be a sniper, or whatever. And it didn't take you very long to unlock these classes. But with the new Battlefront, you took 1,000 years to unlock anything, the new weapons, and there were no classes, so it was basically like, do I want to be a stormtrooper with this blaster or with this other blaster that is essentially the same thing? And my unlocks are, I can now take my helmet off and I'm a black guy with a fro, or I'm a white guy with a buzz cut, or I'm a girl with a ponytail. And those are my customization options. I'm like, no, that's great for the Rebels. and that was the other thing too, is you couldn't pick your team. When you went into multiplayer, it would randomly assign you Empire or Rebels, which I'm like, I don't care about the Rebels. I want to be Empire. So every time I was in a match as the Rebels, it just frustrated me. I'm like, I don't want to play this. I want to play as the Empire. And it assigned you randomly. There was no way to choose. It was so... I was just going at every point, I'm going, who decided this game was a good idea the way it is? You're taking everything that people hate and putting it in this game.
Yeah. In thinking about it, I do remember playing as Empire a lot, and I never would have chosen that.
Yeah.
And not remembering why. I think I probably dismissed it because they... in the matchmaking, rather than getting lopsided on one side or another, they would just...
I understand
fill it
that,
down.
but I don't care about lopsided. I want to play as the Empire, I do not.
In a medium of storytelling and or gameplaying that is entirely built around the concept of you control some aspect of this, taking away player control is almost never a good idea, in my opinion. So.
But again, they were gearing it towards the Call of Duty mindset. And so what's important there is getting in, shooting things.
Yeah.
Right.
They were
that's-
gearing it towards the lowest common denominator.
Right.
Which is so bad. I hate that. I hate when games do that.
Which is, again, it goes to EA's design philosophy, is how do we monetize as many people as possible?
Yeah.
EA is the worst.
Call of Duty is wildly successful, so let's just make that and put Star Wars on it.
EA stands for evil always.
Oh, you are not kidding. By the way, EA, we're definitely at some point going to talk about your colossal mess of a release for Battlefront 2. And
We're going to talk about it here.
Well,
About it at
we'll
the end
touch
here.
upon it. Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
I want to go in depth and read some of the comments on Reddit because they were hilarious.
Let's see. So yeah, first Battlefront releases, becomes the highest
first
selling
new
Star Wars game. Yeah, first new
Speaking of not knowing how to name video games.
Yeah.
Yeah, no kidding.
So that was in November. In December of that year, Force Awakens releases. So this is where they had a really heavy...
It was a part of the Journey to the Force Awakens
right.
Promotion.
Right.
Yeah, like advertising.
They also, I believe they also had a DLC that released the same day as Force Awakens. That was all Force Awakens themed. So they tried that in very closely. And then in 2017, in January, Star Wars Force Arena is released. Which is one you probably also haven't heard about. It's interesting. It's kind of a MOBA, but not really. And MOBA is a massive online battle arena, is what it stands for. What it is you take two teams of players, and you have usually 3 paths around a map, and you're trying to destroy the other team's base. This one was you just had 2 players, one on either side, and you just had 2 paths in an arena, but you did get to summon your own units to the field. You had a hero, usually it was a Jedi or someone. You could summon in a tank or summon in a group of foot soldiers or random things. Yeah. It was interesting. Again,
sounds kind of like a watered down League of Legends or something.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, it is. It's still available. You can download it if you wish. It was one of I got through the first couple levels of progression. Didn't really keep me much after that. I did download it again, but I haven't opened it yet while I was researching this. So, and then November of 2017, Battlefront 2 releases, and the world explodes or implodes. The gaming world implodes. And then in December,
which is
Last
part
Jedi
of me
releases.
is always this. It's inclined to be I hear that phrase and I'm just fandom can be an entitled group of whiny-bees. But at the same time, it's no, it was so bad. It was
so
legitimately
bad.
just...
And then also, EA, I watched that whole thing go down over 3 days. I was just who is in charge at EA? And do you have a team of people going, brainstorm everyone, the worst possible decision we could make? Worst idea wins. Go. Because every time they open their mouth to try to handle the backlash, it was just what were you thinking? That is the absolute wrong answer.
Yeah, it was not handled well because EA feels like they can do no wrong because they make all sorts of money.
Oh, it was so wonderful.
So, that is the timeline, the official timeline up to this point. That was the first half of my notes. We are at 2.5 hours. So, that's our timeline of LucasArts. The beginning, the end. Now I just want to mention several of the notable items in both what it's done to the industry and also, the reasons why it fell.
Yeah.
So first, I just wanted to make a particular note of Loom, like I talked about before, just because there was more to this that it did awesome than what other games did. So, Loom, when they went into it, this game, one of their philosophies for it was that it was made to be completed. Usually, point-and-click games, or even a lot of games in general beforehand.
Back in the day,
yeah. The developers did not really go through and worry about making sure you didn't get stuck. So you might be able to ruin your playthrough forever sort of thing. You might find a wall that you couldn't go back and you can't progress, and so you'd just be stuck
some early decision, or they'd also be very low on explanation of how to do or what to do anything.
Right.
The pinnacle of that being Wizardry 4, which... it was something 90% or more of the players who picked up that game never made it out of the first room.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Whoops.
Oh, I did not know that.
But it's hated and loved. But
right.
Yeah, it was legendary for that.
So that was one of their mantras for this was make sure that you can complete it. So, a big thing also that advanced games in general was the development of the ability to use dithering in early games. Now, dithering is a process where you take a block of color, put it next to another block of color, and then when you view them together, they kind of give you the illusion of a third color. This sort of concept is used in a lot of different mediums, but this was the first time that it was actually able to be done in games. So, normally, like I was saying earlier, when the computers that they were designing for could either display in 4 colors or in 16. I actually have it written down here now, so I know for sure. The artist that was working on Loom actually started making or developing this in the game they were working on previously. I don't remember the name of it, and I forgot to write it down. In their discussions in whether to use dithering or not, they said it couldn't be done because the programming couldn't handle the colors. They couldn't compress it very well so that you could get a decent run frame rate sort of thing.
Yeah.
We call it frame rate now. Back then you weren't worried about frame rate. It was just a matter of just getting it to run at all.
Yeah.
Anyway, and so the programmers were under the impression that it couldn't be done, didn't want to do it, that sort of thing. Well, the artist, who in his frustration and wanting to get it done one day, makes this beautiful, beautiful scene. It has a field and there's trees and there's a good gradient for a background so that you can tell the difference between all these levels of mountains and that sort of thing. So he makes this scene and he just goes to lunch, right? Just in his frustration. He says he got back and the two of the studio heads were sitting in front of his computer discussing why dithering couldn't be done. And then 2 months later, it could. So they saw this image, and then the studio heads sat down and got the programmers to actually get there and make it work. So
That's cool.
that
What year was
pushed. This was Loom, so that was, looking back, where did I put it? Early. I mean, we're talking 80s. It's early on.
Okay, sorry.
But yeah. Also, Loom was the first thing. Well, I shouldn't say first time, because I'm not sure. I didn't actually verify that fact or not. But it was also, in Loom, they used MIDI versions of several tracks from Swan Lake.
Oh.
So they actually took classical recorded songs, made them work in a 16-bit engine, and then played those throughout the game, which was very rare for the time. So, now we're going to talk about problems and the reasons why LucasArts fell. My first note and the big issue was the short deadlines that would have kind of a recursive effect on the business people. So business people will give you a deadline. When you don't hit it, they start making changes, and in games, those changes end up having the effect of making things take longer, which makes you miss more deadlines. So, Battlefront 2, the original Battlefront 2, was given a 1-year development cycle. Then 6 months into the development cycle, they were told to add a campaign onto what was planned to be a multiplayer-only game. So they came in and they saw, oh, hey, single-player campaigns are awesome. We need to do one in the second game. Do it. But they hadn't planned on doing it. So there was a lot of scrambling to try and fix things.
I think they handled it well, though, in the original Battlefront 2, the multiplayer campaign where you're conquering planets and stuff. Like, that was awesome.
But you'll notice it's very minimal
and clunky, and
they definitely tried to make it work with what they were already working on.
Yes.
Right. So they didn't really do any custom encounters. They didn't do any custom maps that were campaign only. It's all on the same stuff that you work on. They just put in a way to kind of go in between.
Mm-hmm.
They gave you kind of an overworld map.
A framework, basically.
Yeah. Battlefront 3, which was planned, and this is still in that original generation, they planned on a Battlefront 3, but it didn't go so well. So it was being created by a developer called Free Radical, and the game was almost done, but basically LucasArts stopped supporting it.
And it looked so pretty.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
I'm just going to read my notes just the way I wrote them, just for speed's sake. So it seems that the change in management from Jim Ward to Daryl Rodriguez caused the issues. Jim loved the project, but Daryl was very demanding when Free Radical started hitting issues with their desired 100-player count matches. They wanted to do you had a battle going on the ground, you could jump in a ship, fly to space, and continue to fight there. And they also wanted to have 100 people doing it at the same time. Tech wasn't there to support that at the time, but they were trying. They ended up trying to walk things back, like they pushed it back to a 50-player limit, and a couple other things, but it just wasn't working. LucasArts' side of the story is that about that time that they were wanting to work on Battlefront 3, Free Radical was shipping the game called Haze. LucasArts was suspicious that Free Radical had pulled developers off Battlefront 3 to finish that game. Free Radical stopped communicating. LucasArts tried to send producers over, but were denied entry to the building.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Shots fired, man.
Yeah. Shortly after, Daryl Rodriguez was put in as president of LucasArts and ramped up pressure on Free Radical. LucasArts stopped paying Free Radical and stopped giving them feedback on their milestones. Free Radical says that the game was 95% done, but they had to can it. Free Radical says it was intended to starve them out, the tactic of not paying them. And this is something that you do see from time to time. Usually the tactic is usually employed to make sure the other entity has to back out of the deal.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a starvation tactic. So Free Radical, in response, creates a scathing satire video aimed at LucasArts, which was kind of the last straw for Darryl Rodriguez. The two companies severed ties, moving Battlefront 3 to another development company, which also just didn't go anywhere. Next, we have a Darth Maul game. This is also still under the heading of short deadlines. So, the Darth Maul game was supposed to be like the Arkham games. Third person.
That would have been sweet.
Focus on sneaking. I know.
Holy cow, that would have been so cool.
And it was supposed to focus on Darth Maul's backstory. It was being created by a studio called Redfly. LucasArts wanted it to tie in to the Darth Maul arc in Clone Wars.
That would have been so cool. Oh man,
the developers, yeah, they got partway into their pitch before George Lucas, who was in on the meeting, told them to stop and make the game about Darth Maul and Darth Talon, because there was a figure of Darth Talon sitting kind of next to a Darth Maul figure they had sitting there. You probably know more about Darth Talon than I do.
She's a Twi'lek.
Dark Side.
Yep.
Apparently
red
bad news.
with like.
Oh yeah.
Imagine
yeah.
Darth Maul's like tattoo, red, black paint scheme on a Twi'lek female. That's her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen it.
I have her in Lego form.
Oh, do you?
Yep.
Cool. So when it was commented on that those two characters were too far apart in the canon timeline, Lucas said to just make the main character a descendant of Darth Maul or a clone or something. He wanted them to change
It
everything
would
they
have to
put
be
around.
ancestor.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
Talon is much older than.
I think the thing I was reading was saying it was like 150 or 160 some odd years apart in canon timeline. Redfly sent over several prototypes, but LucasArts refused to sign off on their biggest ideas. LucasArts brought over several of the Redfly developers for a boot camp, and the two developers started working closely together. There were rumors at Redfly that LucasArts wanted to buy the studio, so things were going very well. But in mid-2011, communication from LucasArts abruptly stopped. After 2 weeks, Redfly devs got a couple of LucasArts developers on Skype who looked dejected. The Redfly devs said that they knew what that meant, but the LucasArts devs couldn't say anything. In June, so this was shortly before June, the project was officially canceled. No reason was given to Redfly, but they believed it was because of the Disney acquisition, which again was a little while later.
Yeah.
In 2015, in a Reddit AMA, the CEO director and creative director of Redfly stated that they were working on a prototype to show EA currently and to try and resurrect the project. But again, nothing's been announced. Star Wars 1313 originally was a tie-in to a planned live-action Star Wars TV series called Star Wars Underworld.
It's so cool.
Work was progressing, but stalled when the TV show was delayed. Then Lucas himself got involved.
Dun dun dun.
Yeah. This would follow a bounty hunter and would be an original character, which the studio was on board with. Lucas would often change his mind and shift direction in the middle of production. This would include script changes and tone.
Lucas, if there's one thing you need to stay away from, it's script changes.
Yeah.
Stop it.
Well, and this isn't even like dialogue. This is overarching plot points.
Oh, even
which,
worse.
I mean, maybe
Yeah.
he had good ideas, but the thing is when you're already in the middle of development,
You're
that
there,
changes
like, your
for
direction
games.
is set.
Yeah, you don't change at that point. But it's George Lucas, so how do you say no? Eventually, it was decided that protagonist should be Boba Fett, but they didn't make that decision until it was a couple weeks before the E3 2012 announcement of 1313.
Yeah.
So,
I remember that was cool.
yeah. Work did continue to progress, though, until changes in leadership at LucasArts happened. It was claimed that was the reason for the studio to start missing milestones. I'm sorry, the changes weren't at LucasArts, that was at the developer for 1313. Oh, and this was canceled after the Disney acquisition. Disney didn't renew its trademark. The patent office currently lists 1313 as abandoned because no statement of use or extension request timely filed after notice of allowance was issued.
Sweet, so we can swoop in.
If you want to.
If you want to own the name 1313 for a game.
I do. Let's do it.
People would be so mad. Other miscellaneous troubles. Jim Ward was the typical businessman. He was there between 2004 and 2006. He came from the film side of the Lucas Empire, and the management style was very against the grain of game industry standards. I'm getting this also mostly from a article that Game Informer published, and they had a bunch of anonymous developers, quoting. So take that as you will, because sometimes those can't always be true. So anyway, the anonymous developer says, I don't understand... Oh, a quote. Jim said, this is being related by the anonymous developer, I don't understand why video games can be late. When ILM works on Harry Potter, they don't have a choice to be late. The movie's going to open. The effects have to be done. You don't get it. There's no choice. So I don't understand why we get this situation where games can be late.
Boy, that is such a demonstration of ignorance about how games work.
In film, your processes are more or less known. You might have advances in technology. I mean, you might have a new piece of software that does it better. Games are still very much learning how to do things better.
Well, and especially a game like 1313 where it's open world. So, like a film, for instance, like Harry Potter. Well, guess what? The frames are set when they're filmed. Mm-hmm. Like, you know exactly, okay, well, we only need to make it look good from this one angle at this one instance.
Yep.
So that's, it's so much more simplified than an open world MMO, or MMORPG.
Yeah, regardless of what type of game you're making, there's going to be massive amounts of difference here.
Yeah,
and it's all stuff that has to, where a movie is very much just either we're going to point this and record, and obviously there's a lot of complexity that comes in, but it's the base of the essence of it is no matter what we're doing, we're pointing at this and recording, or we're constructing images to make it look like we pointed something and recorded. Whereas a game is, we have to construct an entire world or system that responds to whatever a player is going to do.
And the camera can point anywhere, anytime.
Well, depending on the game.
Good.
Maybe not, but even
so. That's what I'm saying, but with 1313, though, your camera can point at any direction at any time, and it has to look good in every direction. Yeah. That's shocking that he would say that. Yeah. And
well, even beyond that, though, is that where it's if we're going to change something or we're going to add something, like you were saying, we have to build that into a world that we have here, this massive system we've constructed.
Oh my gosh.
And when I read that, I could only think of the Shigeru Miyamoto quote. And for those that don't know, this is one of the early heads of Nintendo. He was responsible for the designs of games like Mario, Zelda, Star Fox, F-Zero, DK,
those little small games you might have heard?
Yeah, just those little ones. He says, a delayed game is eventually good, but a rushed game is forever bad.
Yeah.
Yes.
So...
Yep.
And comparison between Star Citizen and No Man's Sky.
Yeah. Because No Man's Sky did eventually get good after its updates.
But it was rushed initially, and everybody went, this game is crap, where Star Citizen has always said, we're going to take our time to do it right, and we don't know how long that's going to take.
Yeah.
And the game is phenomenal. Oh my gosh.
Next, we also had, as one developer puts it, Jim loses his meetings. That was the way the article wrote, just an S with 3 dash marks behind it.
Yeah.
So these would be core design review meetings that would have all of the department heads from all the different departments sitting in together. They got very interesting because Jim was apparently partial to asking a question of anyone that was sitting at the table. And so devs would arrive early after they kind of got to understand the way these meetings were going to go. They would arrive early so that they could stand around the room and not have to sit at the table, so that those arriving late would have to sit in the hot seats. The example given was that a young QA person would land in the hot seat and be asked how to improve the game.
QA is quality assurance. So not really in charge of making the game so much as, I found this thing that's broken.
Yeah. Well, I seen that was the thing, and not only that, but he'd be just some young, hadn't been there very long sort of person, or even in games very long. And the question would be asked of the QA person how to improve the game, and the QA person would give an answer that wasn't remotely in the plan, or improvements to what was already there, such as adding online co-op. That was, again, the deciding example. Yeah. And then Jim would say, hey, that sounds great, and then would have the team look at how to actually get it implemented.
So he's just the worst kind of middle manager, it sounds like, who doesn't actually have a clue how things are run and just it sounds like a good idea, so go do it.
Right. From my experience in games, this is kind of a common story.
Oh my gosh.
You have the business people at the top who kind of lose touch with why games are successful or what makes them fun. They're just looking at the numbers and make decisions based solely off numbers rather than the changing opinions and appetites of the industry.
So much more happy with Star Citizen that Chris is himself a gamer. Chris Roberts, developer of Star Citizen, is himself a gamer who goes, okay, as a gamer, I know how I want things to go, what makes a good game. Yeah. And I also happen to be the person in charge.
Yeah.
That's so good.
He would also do things, he would make little decisions that would create a huge amount of work, such as taking a first-person shooter and making it third-person.
Oh.
Now, you think that this would be simple, right? It's just move the camera farther back. But what you don't realize is that in games that are first-person, usually the only actual representation of your character is basically the arm and gun.
And the gun.
Yeah. There is no body. There is no animations to go with that body. And also levels and things will be designed around those camera positions. So if I'm in first person, I can go ahead and block out a scene so that a person standing at eye level will notice. But if you pull up and make it third person where the camera is now farther back or up and above, things might be blocked out that you don't know before. So you have to go in and change, like level design. But again, what you would think would be...
So you're essentially saying, this should be an easy change. Go ahead and remake your entire game.
Basically. Yeah.
Should be easy, right? Get it done.
And then, let's see. I have this as a note, but I thought that was for a specific game. That's right. This is my next set of issues. So you had like the general business person, right? Then another issue that the studio started to have was that things would never get approved. So lots of ideas would be thrown by George, and of course in the upper, studio heads. But if they were waiting for George to comment on it, he just kind of wouldn't. He would be too busy or hadn't had a chance to look at it, that sort of thing, making stuff stall. And I have several. I've messed up on my own notes, but whatever. There were other games that were announced that he was going to oversee, or at least had to approve, such as Imperial Commando, which was going to be a sequel to Republic Commando. A KOTOR 3 was in the works, but never got approved by George.
Probably would have been named something like Jedi Outcast 2.
Well, hold on, because my very next point is there was a Jedi Knight 3 in talks, and they even had
a Jedi Knight 3, the fifth game in this franchise.
They even had some titles that they're throwing around called Drink of Darkness or Jedi Master that they were working towards. And then, of course, I'd already mentioned Darth Maul game. There was also a Han Solo-like game with a game with a Wookiee protagonist, an episode 7 tie-in called Shadows of the Sith. All of those were things that were sent up to George for approval, but just never came back. With the fall of LucasArts, at least the last half of it, there started to arise something that the industry calls the curse of Star Wars, where you just can't make a Star Wars game. They just don't go anywhere. They don't do well. But in my analysis, it's not so much about it being Star Wars. It comes down to having stereotypical business people at the top making decisions.
That is so true in a lot of fields, not just games.
Sure.
I think about previous experiences that I've had working. I was in a sales position one time, and one thing that any salesman out there will tell you is that people who haven't been in sales don't understand how it works. And those people typically are your bosses.
Right.
Where they're like, great, you had a really great sales day. You sold, 10 times more than we thought you would. Wonderful. And then the next day, you don't bring it in. And they go, well, why couldn't you? You did it yesterday. Mm-hmm. They have no idea. That's like, cool, are you going to give me a gun to put to people's heads to say, no, I'm sorry, you actually are going to buy my product? Because if you're going to do that, then great, I can guarantee great sales every day.
Yeah.
But barring that, I can't. And it seems so often that people who get in charge get there because they're sometimes good at networking, navigating, and even occasionally managing people, right. But they don't understand how the cogs work. Yeah, and then they get to the top thinking, well, I've climbed to the top now, therefore I understand everything below me. Now let me make decisions for those things below me. Yeah. And it never works.
Yeah, no, it's never good. My next point on the problems of LucasArts were general problems working for George. So he was very apparently known to generally make random changes in the middle of development. a game that LucasArts worked on, I think they were just publishing, I don't remember if they actually developed or not, was called Fracture. Originally, and George was wanting to change the name of the protagonist. Originally, the names was Briggs, and had been announced as such to the general public.
Oh, whoops.
But George wanted it changed because he liked the name BJ Dart, just because of how the character was running and jumping around. Eventually, the developers compromised, and he is now called Jet Brody. So okay.
that I can see the compromise there.
Yeah, I mean, it's still a little faster, and I guess, yeah, I don't know.
Boy.
Another employee adds, it got to the point that it became difficult to hire new talent because these stories got out into the industry. People thought we were running a madhouse.
Well, that certainly sounds that
yeah.
way.
I also have, under the general problems working for George, there was Force Unleashed specifically. So Starkiller was supposed to be a temporary name. The developers wanted to give him a proper Sith title, and George offered the names...
Oh, boy.
He offered the names Darth Insanius and Darth Icky. One dev says, there was a pregnant pause in the room after that. People were waiting for George to say just kidding, but it never comes. And he just moves on to another point.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Darth Insanius, it's like, okay, Darth Tyrannus, General Grievous, all right. Darth Sidious, yeah, fine. Darth Insanius, okay, kind of fits in there, but Darth Icky? Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Icky Vicky.
That's what I thought. Icky Vicky, you're so icky.
Just the thought of
Being around you makes me so sick.
High five.
I'm delighted to find someone else who can sing that song with me.
Of course, Fairly Odd Parents is awesome.
Yeah.
So the anonymous developer relating that point goes on. Some devs on the decision team, some devs not on that particular decision-making team say that they believe an excuse was made to push the give him a Darth title to the second game. By that time, the second game was coming around, George's names were long forgotten, and the devs just never brought it up.
Anyone who mentions these names is fired.
Yeah. So also, LucasArts worked on prototypes of Force Unleashed 2 for about a year before being given a green light, but then also were told to only take a 1-year development cycle after that. So the devs said that they needed 2 years and that a 1-year dev cycle would lead to a short game with poor reviews.
But they were refused to be given the second year?
Oh yeah, for some reason that sentence looked weird to me.
Yeah.
And can you guess what happened?
They didn't get a second year.
They did not get a second year, and the Metacritic rating of Force Unleashed is 61, and the length is about 6 hours, which incidentally is half as long as the first game. So,
Wow.
Yeah, exactly what the devs said was going to happen did happen.
It's almost like you should trust people who have a lot of experience in the specific thing that you're talking about.
No. All your subordinates are always just trying to get away with something. Mm-hmm. They just want to be lazy.
Yeah.
It's your job to crack that whip and make them do what they claim is impossible, but it's totally possible.
Yeah.
They just need more elbow grease for the same pay.
Yeah.
So,
exactly.
Now we come to...
Actually, for half the pay, because you're only going to pay them for half as long.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So now we come to roughly 2015. I mean, that was just a collation of general problems from all years of LucasArts. So now we're coming to 2015 after the sale. In December 2015, Game Informer posts an article which reads, more than 2 years later, a new interview with Lucasfilm head Kathleen Kennedy, conducted by Slash Film, reveals that it might not be as dead as previously believed. And this is talking about 1313. So our attitude is, she says, we don't want to throw any of that stuff away, she told the publication. It's gold, and it's something we're spending a lot of time looking into. Or we're spending a lot of time looking at, pouring through, discussing, and we may very well develop these things further. We definitely want to. Slash also spoke to Kennedy about the planned Star Wars live television show, and she says, those concepts and early work done on 1313 might find renewed life as inspiration for other works in different mediums. This doesn't mean that Star Wars 1313 is going to be resurrected as it was originally envisioned, but for those interested in those stories set in the Star Wars universe, all might not be lost for those additional tales. When I read that, and we've already been talking about The Mandalorian coming up, it sounds like there are a lot of similarities for what they wanted to do with 1313 that could be resurrected in The Mandalorian. Yeah. Also, incidentally, about 6 hours ago, it was broke. what was it, 6 hours ago? Anyway, someone has also come up with that theory that this might be the genesis of The Mandalorian.
But Ross came up with it first.
That's right. Yep. I wrote this on Tuesday. It is now Saturday.
Just for your reference, that was on Tuesday the 23rd? Yes. Tuesday the 23rd of October 2018. Ross came up with that. He just didn't get it published because we've got several weeks.
That's right. We have a delay
Here.
All right, so now we talk about the future of Star Wars. In talking about the future of Star Wars games, of course you can't do it without talking about EA, but we are, for now. Especially with Battlefront 2, the scandal was so massive that we are going to do, or at least put that in a part of another episode, because this is running long. A little bit.
But just suffice to say, EA is evil.
Yeah, basically.
They might actually be run by Satan himself. I'm just saying.
They do have a tendency to get voted as the worst company in the world by industry professionals consecutively. I know they had a stretch of 2 years in a row. I think they missed a year. I think they then picked it up again. Anyway,
enormously good at money making.
Yeah,
not great at art they are good at building machines to draw money out of people, not creating art for people to enjoy.
Long story short, they look strictly at the numbers and make the decisions completely off that, and it ends up being not good for games. Yeah. They see microtransactions as making huge amounts of money. They don't really accept how they're used. They just see they're making money and say, I'll throw them in, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Everybody hates it.
Again, we'll go into more detail in future episodes. So, I also wanted to talk about some of the other projects that had been announced, but have been shuffled around, such as the linear action-adventure started by Visceral, who is the Dead Space developer. They started development in 2013, and the game was moved to another developer in 2017. Again, that's moved with finger quotes. Expected initially to launch in late 2018 or early 2019, but the restructuring and that moving has pushed it back, and no announcement has been made.
That's code for this game is dead.
Well, I mean, we got...
I guess it could be, but it's not a good sign.
We got The Last Guardian and stuff, but it wasn't a good sign for that game either.
The game was supposed to be set between episodes 4 and 5, and was said to be an Uncharted or Tomb Raider-like game. So it was going to be
kind of cool.
Exploring environments.
Hopefully we get to see it someday.
Yeah, maybe. The lead was Amy Hennig, who was who wrote and was the game director for Uncharted. The protagonist was supposed to be a cracked mirror version of Han Solo, so more of whereas Han Solo does have a little more polish and redeeming qualities to him.
This has less polish and fewer redeeming qualities.
He's going to be more of a scoundrel. The game would focus on the impact of Alderaan's destruction and tell a story about criminal families, scoundrels, and action-packed heists.
That sounds really cool, and it makes me sad that we will probably never see this game.
It sounds decidedly less impressive to me being written by the people who wrote Uncharted.
You don't like Uncharted?
Uncharted. I've never played Uncharted because what little I've seen of the writing makes me want to vomit.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay. We know a game Chris isn't playing.
No.
Visceral had the go-ahead to create something with new characters, no Jedi, no Skywalkers, and etc. But EA, doing its market research, wanted them to put in stereotypical Star Wars stuff. So in other words, they wanted to take that story that they were coming up with, sort of the Rogue One of games, where you didn't have Jedi, and they wanted you to put Jedi in it. The EA pulled devs off of this game, off of this unannounced game, to work on the next Battlefront, which is Battlefront 2 at the time. But Hennig needed a larger dev team than what they even currently had before EA pulled people off the project. Such as Uncharted was a large game. There's a lot of people that have to have their hands on it to make it work in any good time. But EA saw the moneymaker that they knew was going to make money of Battlefront and siphon people off. Also, there was problems with Amy herself being spread too thin. It's partially her fault because she is a little bit of a micromanager, apparently. She wanted to sign off on all the different departments instead of just letting people do it on their own. And Amy was giving... Sorry, just let me read it instead of summarize. So she was giving these massive presentations on the story themes, said one person who worked at the developer. EA executives are like, well, FIFA Ultimate Team makes $1 billion a year. Where's your version of that? So they were, of course, again, only worried about they can do to make money.
That's so... Can you imagine that thinking? FIFA makes $1 billion a year. There are FIFA games. Where's your version of that? How, do you not understand that these are two completely separate worlds?
I know.
These are galaxies apart, no pun intended.
Yeah.
Honestly.
I mean, seriously,
so
that's like looking at a book and being like, well, this is nice, but movies make way more money than most books.
Yeah.
Like, how are you going to movie this up? It's like, it's not a movie. It shouldn't be a movie. Movied books generally aren't good.
And they say they do their market research, but the last, I think, 6 massive releases in games overall have all been linear story-based games. Spider-Man did. Horizon Zero Dawn did. Red Dead Redemption that just came out this week is already massively successful. I don't believe there's multiplayer in that.
I actually think there isn't. Anyway, but
that's not its focus. It's not a Call of Duty.
Not if it's anything like the first one was. Yeah.
Anyway, so then I believe this next one is from EA themselves. Oh, okay, yeah.
But I mean, I'm gonna also step in there and say, comparing those two, like Minecraft or Fortnite, which are often multiplayer. Well, Minecraft is often multiplayer experience. Fortnite is always Battlegrounds and Fortnite and all those. That could be the market research they're looking at.
They're seeing what is the single most largest at any given time and saying, let's make that rather than seeing
which is so
else.
Unfortunate because it's like you don't give these other kinds of games a chance to make money because you won't make them.
Yeah.
It's like if you were to make an actual decent Star Wars game with a good story, it would make you a ton of money, but you're not willing to give it the chance.
But at the same time, it's like it's EA. I mean,
Yeah.
if EA
Evil.
was to make an actual decent Star Wars game, well, sure, but I mean, that doesn't mean that they're capable of doing that.
That's true.
They later, when talking about this particular game, released a statement saying, throughout the development process, we have been testing the game concept with players, listening to the feedback about what and how they want to play, and closely tracking fundamental shifts in the marketplace.
Sure about that, EA?
Hold on. It has become clear that to deliver an experience that players will want to come back to and enjoy for a long time, which that's a key phrase, by the way, for a long time to come, we need to pivot the design. We will maintain the stunning visuals, authenticity in the Star Wars universe, and focus on bringing a Star Wars story to life. Importantly, we are shifting the game to be a broader experience that allows for more variety and player agency, leaning into the capabilities of our Frostbite engine and reimagining central elements of the game to give players a Star Wars adventure of greater depth and breadth to explore. And then my addition is, i.e., they're making it fit their microtransaction model. They are, yeah. And so, in other words, they've changed everything as of late 2017. So we'll see if that ever
and I'm
goes
listening
anywhere.
to that and I'm going like, are they trying to present the concept of a sandbox game as though that was actually anything new? It's like, look what we've discovered, everyone.
They're trying to give you tell you what they're doing, but give you the buzzwords of things they like. So
EA's, like, I'll say this about EA, like, they don't make ugly games. Like, their games do look really pretty, but as Minecraft proves, good graphics do not a good game make. Mm-hmm. You know,
or a good game does not require.
Yes,
you're right.
Well, but that's both are true. Both are true. You know,
when we actually study game development, there is sort of a give and take between story, between graphics, between gameplay. Now, it is also said that gameplay is king. That is the thing that sets the medium apart, right? So you do need to have decent enough gameplay.
I agree, and I'm a storyteller.
Right.
Like,
But you can have a great game that doesn't have a great story. You can have a great game that doesn't have great graphics. It just has to have a decent enough amount.
Well, and Minecraft is
neither of those.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Minecraft has no story, has terrible graphics, awesome gameplay.
Right.
And it's like, you know, I've been playing Minecraft, it came out in like 2012 or whatever, was like the last year that it was in alpha. I got it the last day of alpha. Mm-hmm. I still play that game. I love that game. I have hundreds and hundreds of hours in that game. Love it.
Yep.
Like, that's a game I'll be playing 10 years from now. You know,
Yeah.
And it has no story and terrible graphics.
Yep. So, A couple other things I wanted to note, because we're actually almost at the end. Hooray, listener. We've done it. So,
Thank you for staying this long. Hopefully you haven't died.
For those of you that like longer podcasts, here you go. The open world game that I briefly mentioned before, just as an idea they were working on before the closure before the buyout of LucasArts.
Yeah.
Recently, a job listing has been posted for a lead online engineer. This, according to the articles I found, is not the continuation of the closed down visceral game that we just talked about. That's right. It was part of this article where Amy Hennig has left EA this year and says that the Vancouver studio that her game had been moved to is working on something pretty different, is the words she used. So
your next oh no, sorry, you go ahead. I was reading ahead and I'll pause you when we get there again. Sorry.
Okay. There is another third-person action adventure that started by Respawn Entertainment of May 2016. This was announced with a partnership and a few clips of two people saber fighting in mocap. This is a partnership between EA and Respawn, I should say. The working title, from what I've found, is called Star Wars Jedi: The Fallen Order. It takes place between 3 and 4 and is following a surviving Padawan.
Oh.
The single player is it's single player, story driven only, and it's supposed to be dark and gritty, and should hopefully be out in holiday 2019.
That would be pretty cool.
Hopefully they go in the vein of Jedi Knight. I would be all up for that.
So this next thing is what I was giggling at, because I was reading ahead, listener, in the notes, just to see what was coming up and if I had any comments to make. And I read this line, I read part of this line in the middle of the sentence, and for whatever reason, I read it in Smeagol Gollum's voice, and it fits perfectly. Chris does a pretty compelling Smeagol. I want him to read this next note in Smeagol's voice, the EA.
EA is very averse to story-driven experiences because it thinks they don't make monies.
I just read that, I'm like, wow, that's totally like what EA would say, we don't do this because it doesn't make money. It's totally Smeagol, my precious. Anyway, I couldn't get that image out of my head of Smeagol EA saying that.
And
EA is very averse to story-driven experiences because it thinks they don't make money.
Yeah. And you're also starting to see some of my frustration start to come through with the points. Anyway.
Well, not just your frustration, but the entire gaming community feels these same things, and EA refuses to listen.
Yeah.
It's so frustrating.
Story experiences don't make money, J.K. Rowling.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, man.
I think a part of my notes actually might have gotten lost because I had found some information on their stocks. Oh, wait a minute. That's right. It was in the Battlefront 2.
Yeah, we're going to come back to that
just because,
from now.
Because it's stock prices,
Mm-hmm.
the day you talk about them becomes relevant. I'm just going to mention that one point. With the Battlefront 2 controversy, their stock dropped by $3 billion, I think is what they said they lost in stock.
I remember hearing it was bad.
Yeah. So I went back and I looked at the stock informational data. You can see right where that dip was, and then it climbs back to a year high about 6 months later, which was still way above what they had were at before they lost the $3 billion. But then in the 6 months following, it has now marched back down to where it was at that loss, and I don't know why.
Yeah.
So
I'm glad to hear it though. I don't like to take the piss out of many things in life, but I have hated EA since they ruined Origins gaming.
Yeah.
Which Ultima had become, and
and honestly, I don't want to see anybody's lives ruined. However, since clearly the only thing that matters to EA is money, hopefully the loss of money will make them wake up and listen.
Either they'll wake up and improve, or the very talented artists and game designers that are working there can go somewhere that will actually allow them to be talented.
That would be the ideal, and then see EA collapse into their own failure. That would make me personally happy because I'm a vindictive person.
Well, and I could do a whole episode on why I don't like EA on its own, because they just, every step of the way, don't make good decisions for gaming as a whole.
Yeah.
Like their ad campaign, I think it was for Dead Space 2, it might have been for 1. But the actual commercials that were showing on cable TV was that, this is Dead Space 2, this is the most violent blah, 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 blah thing you've ever done, and your parents are gonna hate it, was their tagline. It's like, oh, are you serious? Your parents are going to hate it is your catchphrase? Really? You're talking to the people that are going to be buying the game for their kids that you're advertising towards, because it was very much an adolescent, male power fantasy sort of geared commercial. But you're going to end it with your parents are going to hate it? Can you be more dense? Anyway, rant over for now.
Well, not to mention
Ross is all red in the face.
Not to mention what that does for the attitude of video games are hyper-violent, causing violence everywhere, blah, 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 blah. I mean, it's just like, that's so stupid.
Yeah. Anyway, recentering, happy thoughts. A couple cool things that will be coming out here soon. ILM X Lab, which is a branch of ILM that are just kind of working on kind of researching and developing kind of cool experiences, are doing several VR Star Wars themed stories. I also have a fellow I went to school with. It's working for them. He's working on it, which is cool. Yeah. The first one that they've announced is called Vader Immortal.
I saw a commercial for this the other day. Whoa.
Yeah.
It looks really cool.
It's was that one... So the other one they're doing is a called Secrets of the Empire, and that's in conjunction with what's called The Void, which is an actual facility you go to, and they give you a VR headset, and they have a whole like warehouse set up with the tracking apparatuses, so you can actually wander through a space and actually play a game yourself.
I've seen a couple things like that.
Was Vader Immortal going to be the same? I couldn't really tell. It is VR, but I wasn't really sure.
It looks kind of like that. I don't know. I just remember.
But it looked cool.
Yeah, I just remember being blown away. Being
something about like you're supposed to be like a rebel, and like the last line is Darth Vader talking to you, wondering why Darth Vader says like, "Yeah, I bet you're wondering why I brought you here" or something.
Yeah.
Anyway, it looked awesome. And ILM X Lab is also doing other various Disney properties, just for your information. And my last little note is just there are a slew of domains that Disney has registered over the past several years that could point towards games. One of which is for sure not. It was StarWarsRebels.com or whatever the ending is, and we know that Rebels is the show.
Yeah.
But there were others such as Gungan Frontier 2, 3, and 4.
Oh my gosh! Stop it.
I think Gungan Frontier is actually an educational game. I think for kids. So I mean, that's
okay. That's if that's what it is.
That's where Gungans
you can
belong.
have it. Yeah. Exactly.
Order 67 was another.
That
domain.
could be interesting.
I'm already intrigued by that title.
Yeah. Star Wars Alliance, Star Wars Rebels, which we know, Star Wars Wolf Pack.
See, that could be because that's Plo Koon's unit.
Is it
clone troopers? Yeah, Commander Wolf, and then his elite clones became known as the Wolf Pack.
Right. Cool.
Yeah.
You also had Wolfpack Adventures and
Wookiee. Dave Filoni loves wolves. That's why they got put in there in the clones. Yeah.
So you have Wolfpack Adventures was another, and then Wookiee Hunters was the last one that I saw.
Hunters.
So
are you Wookiees that are hunting, or are you hunting the Wookiees?
I don't know.
Yes.
Because
I don't know.
Because they got
Wookiee hunters
Trandoshans that are
hunting
hunting
Wookiees.
Wookiees and stuff. I mean, that could be
But as far as like you playing, I'm sure they'd rather have you be the Wookiee.
the good guys. I know.
Yeah.
Nobody's willing to actually commit to making a bad guy game. Thanks a lot, Battlefront 2, for nothing.
Yeah.
So angry.
So, that is the deep dive into LucasArts, what it's done, what it's doing, and all of that.
A giant in the footnotes of gaming history
Indeed.
Yep.
that came to a rather ignominious end.
Yeah.
It's so sad. It really is.
Well, and with it still being a functioning licensor, I mean, there is still always the potential that Disney could resurrect it.
But even if they do resurrect it, it's not what it was. Like, even if they rise to a significant amount of prominence, it's not a resurrection.
It's not where it was in 2000 to like 2006.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not Anakin Skywalker turned to the good side again. It's Luke Skywalker, his son, who bears a lot of similarities, and we're happy to see him.
But the thing is, I was so floored by the announcement that Disney was closing it down, because there are huge, huge areas of potential that you could go with games, with these stories. Star Wars is a huge, massive brand that you're trying to re-support. You're trying to get really kind of fluff up again. You're trying to refresh, and games are going to be a huge addition to that. I mean, how do you ignore the whole gaming side of Star Wars?
I would say it's a large part of it is just the function of a bunch of executives who don't understand video games, who looked at that and went,
their target audience, honestly.
EA makes bank on video games, so obviously they should be doing this, not this little company here.
Yeah.
It's like, why do that in-house when we've already got Disney Interactive? We've already got in-house gaming companies. Are we going to have another in-house gaming group?
You don't have Disney Interactive anymore.
Yeah, well, and that's exactly. It's like, why are we doing all this in-house when we can just hire someone to do it really well? Because they don't understand what making them really well means. They just understand that they make a lot of money. And
yeah,
no good.
Anyway,
I think that's about it.
That is
I
it.
mean, we covered it, and then some.
Yes, we did. Honestly, I didn't think it was going to take this long, but
we chimed in a
Here we
lot.
are.
We maybe should have saved a lot of our gushing over the games for the games episode.
Oh,
but then
yeah,
that
we're
would have
gonna
just
go-
been ludicrous long.
Yeah.
So.
yeah.
We're going to
We
get
didn't
there.
even get into some of my favorite Star Wars games. So.
So, in a couple weeks, we're going to have a Star Wars game episode where we talk about the games and stuff. That'll be pretty fun. But until then, you should be sure to follow us on Twitter at More Civilized and join our Facebook group, A More Civilized Podcast, so that we can hear what you have to say. We had some really good comments this last week from a listener. It's pretty great.
Also,
So-
special thanks to our one listener from Sweden.
Yeah, pulling ahead in the race between Sweden and the UK.
Yeah, please, join the Facebook group and make yourself known, man.
Honestly,
We wanna say hi.
I've been thinking about this. I think I'm going to make
Or
this. I'm going to make this announcement now. So I recently curb stomped the competition in a Star Wars trivia competition that our local library had, and I won.
He arrived late,
Yes.
so he didn't even get to answer the first few questions, and he still won.
Yeah, yeah, not to brag, but anyway,
That's why I'm
We'll
doing
do
it.
it for you. Yeah.
Yeah.
and I won a Pop Funko Vader. Funko Pop, whatever it is. I never collect those. But if that's a thing that you're interested in, I will totally ship it to Sweden or UK if you reveal yourselves. Whoever reveals yourself first, I will ship it to you. My own dime, I will send it out to you as a props to you for listening to us.
A completely organic listen, apparently, as far as we know.
Yeah, I don't know anybody in Sweden.
I don't either.
so-
I don't even know anyone that would know anyone in Sweden.
Yeah, so anyway, whatever. We want to know who you are. Thanks for listening. And all of those people in Nevada that are listening all of a sudden
And
last
everywhere else.
week.
And
Thank you all.
we love you all.
We,
Yeah,
we do love you guys. But yeah, join the Facebook group so we can get to know you guys better and get some faces associated with these blank statistics we have from Podbean.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And follow us on Twitter at More Civilized.
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Also, our website is a morecivilizedpodcast.podbean.com. You can talk with me on the Twitters at Mr_R*.
You can get largely ignored by me on Twitter at Itinerant Baxter. I get on there less and less these days. I'm on Facebook less and less these days, and Twitter isn't even. So I may just stop handing out that handle soon because it might be a waste of time. And please let us know if you have any ideas, things you would like to hear us discuss at great length or short length. We can try. And let us know if there's anywhere you would like to find our podcast that you cannot. And, we would love to hear it.
Yep. May the Force be with you.
Always.
I'm Anna Graves, and thank you for listening to a More Civilized podcast.
You might have saw my Facebook post. I had Baby Shark stuck in my head last night. I wasn't even mad. I love that song. I love it.
A moment of silence for the death of LucasArts.
Sorry. I couldn't help it. I tried. Oh, gosh.
That's going in
so
the end.
good.
Beautiful.
Go beans.
Okie dokie.
Chili. Black or pinto.
Yes.
That's so dumb. I love it. I love you too. I love it so much. Oh, shoot. Okay. Woo.